Hi.
You're now live with Cafe Unconscious with the best in the groovitational music to go. Here on the cafe, we are brewing for you the finest in smooth jazz and R&B. So lay back, relax, and let your mind go to the space beyond at Cafe. I just think our name, it shares a lot of shares a lot of DNA with like real smooth like after hour stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you have a
It's
reason. You have a reason to write some more music.
it's
I think you gotta.
gravitational,
Yeah.
situational, lackadaisical, baby.
And hot, by the way, and hot. Here we are with our third episode. At least that's the current plan. I believe the last thing we did, it's going to be episode two. It was a deep dive into part 18, primarily, but not entirely, through the framework of your all-encompassing sort of grand theory about Twin Peaks. And dude, that was the best show I've done. That was phenomenal on your end. You know,
Well, let me go ahead and
I'm pretty
l-
much just like asking a bunch of questions and whatnot, and then giving you the microphone.
let
You
me set the
were fantastic.
expectations for the fine listeners here of the newly named Cafe and Conscious. This is going to be very confusing to those folks that step into episode one and go, they have a name. They have a name. What is their problem? Why don't they know they don't have a name? Well, wouldn't it just be like this show to mess with the linear nature of time and understanding? Yes, it would be. We didn't have a name then, we have a name now. But I'm going to set expectations right away. What that show was for good information and concise thoughts, this show will be the opposite of that. Let me introduce you to a world where Anthony. So ladies and gentlemen, do you have the kids? Do you know about the kids? Do you know what happens when you have the kids? Have you tried that? Have you
Have
tried
the
having
kids.
kids? You know what I mean? It's so when you have the kids, there's going to be this time in your life. Let's call it the duration of those children's formative years where you don't sleep anymore, and that's exactly where I'm at. I'm at that point where you know I'm keeping my writer credential situation, right? So I'm like writing into the night, supposedly making money, is what they tell me. And then I have to be up with the kids first thing in the morning, right? So I was rearing to go. I was ready the last episode, right? We waited till now. We said, hey, let's do some really complex ideas, some really just stuff you could elaborate on that is going to take all of your mental bandwidth to like facilitate and wrangle in to make it go somewhere. And I said, yeah, well, I'll see that and I'll raise you. I'll sleep 15 hours this week.
It is 11:07 p.m. on my end, and so this round you got to pick the topics, and you picked two scenes. One of them directed by David Lynch, one of them not. One of them directed, I believe, Tim Hunter did the episode that we're going to talk about. And so that got me thinking because your overall theory about the show is that Mark Frost's contribution um, is larger than people often tend to realize or tend to give credit to, and in fact, so large that it shapes a lot of the structure of the show. Is what you believe specifically in that um, his belief or adherence to a Jungian type storytelling has allowed him to craft Twin Peaks to be um, not just dabbling in Jungianism, but maybe demonstrating a lot of the concepts from that psychological point of view, and like in terms of there being a dreamer, Carrie Page, or somebody very similar to Carrie Page, and all sorts of activity happening beneath the surface in her personal
If it's not
unconscious.
Carrie Page, you can bet your ass that she looks just like her and they're cousins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess to stop meandering, my direct question would be, if that is in fact the case, and Mark Frost had this sort of concept of bringing the personal unconscious drama to life in the form of a show, um, could somebody who's a great director, not named David Lynch, have potentially paired up, if they had the rapport, have potentially paired up with a Mark Frost and executed this show? My knee jerk answer, especially after watching the two scenes that we watched today, my knee jerk answer is no. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, okay. So this type of question is it's structured in such a way that it does create an instantaneous and knee-jerk reaction to the question. But really if we look at the framework of the question versus what actually happened in terms of the production, then we really have to ask ourselves a few things about that question before we can just simply answer it. If you're asking me whether or not Mark Frost can take this concept to a different director and then they create the entire aesthetics of it, and what we end up with is something very similar to Twin Peaks, the answer to that is no. No, we don't end up with something that has anything next to those sensibilities.
No.
And I'm not positive that the co-writing between the two of them, this esoteric game that even they tend to play with one another. It's not just us that doesn't have the fulfillment of someone's answers for everything. It's also them, right? Now you can better believe they have a much better understanding. We have Mark Frost on record talking about when he was confused by things, he would pull David Lynch aside and go, "Now make that make sense to me. Now I'm going to write it in canon so that it makes sense, whatever." Even if even if and even when they don't tell the audience what those things might be, but it was important to him to have that understanding. With that said, we also have instances on record where when David Lynch looks at something that doesn't necessarily resonate with him, he will suggest that it's not his Twin Peaks, which goes to show you that even their dialogue about it, more comprehensive though it might be, I don't think that it reaches like a full totality, right? So if we talk about just the creation of Twin Peaks, can that occur without David Lynch? No, no, there's no world where that can occur. But it couldn't have occurred anyways, because already, Frost is using the framework. He's going like it's Peyton Place meets Blue Velvet. Okay, so some of the aesthetics is already these David Lynch baked in aesthetics. Now he can do that, and he can take that to a different director. But Lynch is still fairly early on, right? Lynch hasn't gone into his full blown exploration into all of the various parts of the psyche when it's in cognitive dissonance, like he will do. Okay, so because he'll spend a large majority of his career focused on that very theme. So if a director only has a couple of David Lynch's works to go on, and they're trying to sort of wrap their head around, well, where does Lynch get these stories, and how Kafka-esque is this, and can I really use that as a framework? Like, are they going to come up with the same sensibilities? And the answer is no, because I think what's going to happen is I think people are going to focus on weirdness rather than Americana, right? And one of the most important elements of all of Lynch's work is Americana, right? Sometimes it's a commentary on Americana, but not quite as often as I think people like to believe that it is. Sometimes it's a nostalgic look, a pure look, an innocent look at Americana. And it's that innocence being ruptured that gives you sort of that purified feeling of estrangement, right? And I think that's what works so well. So if you're going to do weird for weird's sake, you're never going to have that feeling. So that answers that question. However, there's another side of that coin, Anthony, because now we do have it. Now we do have it. There have been properties in the world with creators in the world where their fan base is ravenous enough to believe that anyone who ever touches that work, they will fail epically and it will die a gruesome mutant death. And then it happened. And then people realized what sort of reins were sort of let go because of the fact that people who deeply appreciated that property got their hands on it and then made more of that property, right? So when I hear people say, well, in this world now, you couldn't do it's not like you could do a spinoff of the Mitchums, you couldn't do a spinoff of this, you couldn't find all these angles in this world and create sort of a Twin Peaks universe because you can't do it without David Lynch. I think that the evidence is contrary to that. I think that we've already got evidence of when capable, at least capable filmographers, directors, thinkers sort of put their ideas into the fabric of something that Lynch has already developed as these are the aesthetics, these are sort of the linguistic rules to it, we've seen pretty clear evidence that you can make very important scenes and very poignant moments and even things that become catchphrases that we're all obsessed with and things that we really enjoy. So I'm not one of those. I do understand. Look, if you had five directors take a swing at doing a Twin Peaks spinoff of some sort, right? Whether it be a character or whether it just be another connective tissue of some sort, you're gonna have good, you're gonna have bad. But the vocal folks who would just absolutely, desecrate the idea that it could ever happen, that's not a fair interpretation of how the show actually worked to start off with, you know?
I think my question was a little bit poorly phrased, but thank you. I think what I was trying to say and didn't really say it well is if Mark Frost had this idea that you think he had for the show, um, and from the infancy was working with somebody else who was great at their job, of course it wouldn't be Twin Peaks as we know it. Absolutely not at all. But could it have been a successful show, do you think?
Well, that's hard to know. It would have, look, we know that it would be an entirely other show.
Would it have been corny? Like would it have been a little bit corny?
It's hard to know. Sometimes Twin Peaks is corny. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's by design. Sometimes it's not by design, right? Again, like our the Twin Peaks community, we love to justify every little aspect of things, but sometimes it's just something gone awry. You know what I mean? As a medium that vast is going to do. To answer your question, that's really hard to say. Look, we know it'd be a different show. It would have been a unique show for where it's set. But an interesting thing is, again, we look back with our rosy colored glasses and we like to say things like, there was no show that could have, ever been of this sort of universe and no one had ever done things like that. And it's like that's not even close to true. That's not even close to true. Television had a variety of theater with surrealism. It had a variety of masterpieces. I mean, The Twilight Zone alone, the level of things that they're doing. A show that's informed by media, that's St. Elsewhere. The entire show took place inside the mind of someone who used media to inform the entire narrative of the show that already occurred, right? So again, people are very uncomfortable when you start taking sort of the credit away, right? It's a conflict. It's all of those things. It's this strange nexus point where all of these things they converge and it creates something that no one's ever seen before. It would have been something strange that no one had ever seen before, even if it's not David Lynch. But would they have cared? No. No, I don't think that they would have cared. And then we get incredible. It's the push and pull of the two of them. I don't think the community is wrong about that, right? The push and pull of the two of them is very important. I don't know whether or not where he was as a television writer at the time, Mark Frost wouldn't have given you too much too soon. I don't know. It's hard, it's hard to say, but that's the medium that he's in, where they're gonna explain it. They're gonna tell you. You know what I mean? And so that's difficult to say. Plus, they're trading on David Lynch's power. David Lynch has the ability to tell the network, we're not taking any notes from you and we don't care. Don't send us a note. You don't like it, you don't like it, that's fine with us. You know what I mean? But don't, we're not, you're not going to tell us how to do what we're doing. And again, that doesn't happen with somebody else.
The
You
Twin
can't work
Peaks
with me. You see what I'm doing?
the Twin Peaks Police Department, with the help of Special Agent Dale Cooper, end up ushering and tricking Leland Palmer, getting him into the jail cell instead of Ben Horn, wherein Leland Palmer undergoes a series of transformative experiences, leading with him kicking the bucket in the end and hooting and hollering and having the appearance of Bob showing up and then not showing up, supposedly. Uh, Bob maybe doing a little singing and dancing and taunting, but really, um, Bob freaking out in some sense, saying that he's going to live on, saying that he's going to have to find a new host. Leland was good while he lasted. Bob making this remark about what happened to Cooper in Philadelphia with a knife. Like, how would Bob know that? Interesting. And then eventually, the scene transitioning into an outdoor scene. I think it's outdoors,
Oh,
where
possible.
Colonel Garland Briggs and
Danger
Special
Alert.
Agent Dale Cooper and um, who else is there? Andy is there, I think. Hawk was involved in all this, but Hawk is not in the scene. And Albert is there. Maybe Andy's not there. Albert is there, and Harry Truman is there. And they talk about some stuff. And this is the scene you picked. So I'm not really a theorist on this show. It's not really my strong suit, but you have a theory in general, but you also have thoughts on this particular scene. I'm wondering if you want to talk about the scene free from your theory, or if it's sort of, how does this scene relate to your theory? I guess take it either way you want.
Well, so I chose this scene because in the scene, the discussion that's happening, I think, is one of the very first times where, in a very major way, we as the audience are introduced to the idea, not just from visual cues or things that just cannot be or should not be, but we are actually privy to a conversation where the basic underpinnings of the conversation are people asking themselves whether or not what they have seen is real and whether or not what they've seen, can it happen? Did it happen? Did it happen the way that they thought it happened? And so I chose this moment because we will get more validating moments that what is occurring in a person's mind. In fact, from a visual perspective, we've already seen those things. We've already seen sort of archetypal Jungian concepts be floated out and then come to life in other scenes. But in this scene is the first time it's sort of discussed with us. We're sort of in on the conversation, the Twin Peaks audience, that the concept that none of this is occurring in the way that we're visualizing it is something that's now open for discussion. And so that's an important thing. Now, the reason why this scene is important to point out is not just because in the linear timeline of things, the discussion where they start to ask, is Bob the evil that men do? Was Leland crazy as Truman suspects? Did they, what is it? Did they even see any? Was that even real? Right. But why that seems important to me is because Frost, in several interviews, um, and I believe it's earlier. I think it's earlier, and now it's again in the last few years since the return has the the newness of the return has died away. He's been open to discussing Bob is a psychological framework. The evil that men do, psychosis, the idea of cognitive dissonance, the way that we can shift blame, the way that something that happens inside of us, and then particularly stuff that happens inside of people with with a bent toward the psychotic, is much like the arbitration of your true self in your mind, right? The way that that plays out. So this scene is important because it's the first time that it's openly talked about between the characters, right? Now this will come back in a big bad way where characters will know not just that they're questioning the nature of reality, but that their purpose is to question the nature of reality in some aspect, right?
For instance.
Well, for instance, Jeffries, whom we will talk about later or at some point, Jeffries is the first character that we know of to corroborate the fabric of the reality that he inhabits, that other people inhabit at the time where he's speaking to them, is not the reality that they perceive it to be. Now, again, I think that there's plenty of times where Audrey sort of dances on the edge of that, right? I think that asking whether or not things are too dreamy is a little bit more on the nose than people may suspect, and I think that that's paid off to us, right? The question of she's almost asking, does isn't this weird? And then involuntarily, the dancing, the being part of the scene occurs regardless, right? It's almost like asking, the feeling, that this overwhelming feeling of participating in this construct, this surreal soap opera. It's almost like bringing up that it's strange, but it's so early into the show that that's part of the game, is that you're not aware really of that. But by this part of the show, now we're going to full blown analyze the authenticity of a character that you saw with your own two eyes. We're gonna do that, and there's good reason for that. There's good reason for that, because even in the show narrative, what Bob is doing through Leland doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. You don't have any evidence that Bob behaves that way. You've seen Bob. You've never seen Bob behave that way. You've also seen Leland. You've seen Leland behave that way. Bob is behaving more like Leland than he is like Bob while he's Leland. So all of this sudden, it's becoming very murky to us, right? It's becoming very strange. Is this Bob? Is it just the evil that men do? Is Bob just some name that we use because we can't face the atrocity that someone could create a horror the way that Leland Palmer did? What is it? Right? And the answer seems to be, if you listen to Mark Frost when he talks in interviews and otherwise, the answer seems to be that he himself doesn't believe that people are inhabited by something, that he believes that that is in fact the person, but that those people in a sort of cognitive dissonance may be the wrong term in this instance, but in a psychosis, they can almost become other than. And so it is almost an unbridled, purified evil because it's an othering of self, right? So these are things that he's sort of been free to discuss, right? And so that's what makes this scene so interesting to me, is that it will come up in other places. It will come up in other places. So we give a lot, obviously in Firewalk with Me, we're very much confronted with the idea that, Leland is not a good dude. And that's when it starts. We sort of sit back and remember, we go through the scene where Leland dies and the way that he feels about his daughter, and it's pulling and it's emotional, and you think about it from Leland's perspective, and that's almost enough to make you forget that Leland is the lawyer for the worst person in Twin Peaks and probably the state. He knows where all those bodies are buried. His central position in life is to make sure that a drug dealing, prostitute whoring murderer gets to live his life however the hell he pleases, and it's Leland's job to make sure that that happens. Leland is not a good dude, not by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, he's got a predilection toward living in this disgusting filth. That's who he is as a person, right? And so Lynch further starts to blend the line in Fire Walk with Me and makes you ask yourself, is this Leland? Right? Because clearly it's Leland who gets the phone call regarding the blackmail that Teresa Banks is trying to enact on him. So what would make you think it's not Leland who murdered Teresa Banks? What would make you think it's Bob? And if that's true, and he murdered her in the exact fashion that he goes on to murder Laura Palmer, what would make you think it was ever anybody else? And if you can see Bob with your own two eyes, and yet the line is now blurred whether or not Bob exists, what makes you think that what you're watching is real? You're seeing things you can't possibly see. If that's true, then you're seeing things you can't possibly see, which is fine because these are all things happening in a personal unconscious over a battle of individuation. And that's why. That's the scene is fast. And in terms of scenes that you could analyze, right, there's plenty of things where you could analyze and you could do it till your head explodes and you'll never come to a full-blown conclusion. It will be fun the whole time you do it. What's important about this thing is the is what it's doing to up the ante in Twin Peaks community philosophizing, right? And how it does it so casually. It does it just so innocently, like it just casually drops the bomb on you that if these guys don't know what they're witnessing, how can you know? You know.
And one of the biggest things that's important to the scene within the jail cell is Leland or Bob or whoever it is referencing what happened to Cooper in Philadelphia and his whole knife incident, because that's something that Leland presumably would have no idea of knowing. So the fact that whoever wrote the dialogue put that line in there is very interesting, and that just kind of adds to the ambiguity. And it's illogical why it would be in there
It really is.
unless it's part of that, and that's, I guess, maybe that puts a check mark in your corner, perhaps.
Perhaps it does, but again, I look.
I know
Frost
you're
is
not keeping score. Maybe you
Frost
are.
is one of these guys. Frost has admitted that, like when it comes to stuff about the media that he includes, sometimes that stuff is going to have a point, but some of it's just him just loving to like fill the personal unconscious of this dreamer with different things throughout the media, and it's just things that he likes, right? This film, this character name, all these different references exist. Sometimes they end up paying off, and maybe he had a plan all along, and then sometimes they don't, and but that is just like the personal unconscious. Sometimes in your dream, I mean, look, if you want to take a Freudian analysis utility to it and elect to believe that you can decode a dream and then extract a meaning from it, that's fine. But some of it's just going to be some shit that happened in a dream, right? You're going to go with the main narrative. You're going to go with the main thing that you witnessed in the dream, and you're not going to have every little vague piece of scenery that you're going to incorporate in your self-analysis to then say, aha, this is what it all meant, right? And the same is true of the personal unconscious. And so I think sometimes with a line like that, because you think, well, that's not even relevant to Bob's trajectory. It certainly isn't by the return or how we saw that Bob was put into this situation with the Palmers. And so why would he be hanging around with Cooper then? What is the point of what we're saying here, right? And so that does seem to me like it's almost an innocuous. It's supposed to what? It's supposed to corroborate that Bob is in fact an entity that is in fact in Leland because he does have information that he could not otherwise possibly have, but also he's got information that Bob couldn't possibly have, because what does that have to do with Bob? right? So I'm not positive that that line holds any meat or goes anywhere.
It's got to be there for a reason. If only to say, Bob is this character, this entity that can travel um, in one way or another, whether it's travel in the real world that the characters in the show are in, or travel in the mental world, of Carrie Page or whomever.
Well, right.
That
Well,
that line that line is not a throwaway line at all. I mean, it's there to do work. It's there to
well, it's
complicate things.
possible, but I mean, if you're going with my framework and you're saying like, look, that there's some sort of a validation that if all of these characters can somehow have peripheral understanding of all the other characters, what's up with that? And it's like, well, when we put our Freudian hat on, we would say, well, you are all the people inside of your dream, and that's very Jungian because Jungian is playing from that same rule book, right? Um, and yeah, there are instances where it does seem like other characters are speaking about instances or situations and stuff that they couldn't quite possibly know, or we didn't know that they were privy to. You know what I mean? Particularly with things happening with Albert and Jeffries and
Yeah,
Mr. C and like these things where you're going, well, how are you in on that? And how do you even know that? But so no, it's not the first time. But what I'm saying is, in terms of the grand scheme of the theory, does that do any more than suggest that these entities have sort of an omnipresence? It's hard to say that, right? But if they do and they're not real, then what the hell does that mean, right? It's just the same way that your brain has the same utility to pull from the sources that it does. They're all pulling from the same source.
yeah. The We are going to jump ahead, but before we do jump ahead through 25 years or so of time, um, Briggs is in this episode, and the waiter, and Briggs brings the waiter to the roadhouse when Special Agent Dale Cooper is trying to gather basically all the potential suspects in one place, and then Briggs is there for the evil that men do discussion. Um, General thoughts on Briggs at this point in the show, or not the fireman, the waiter, the role that either of them are playing, without going too far afield.
Well, we know what the waiter is. We know that the waiter is another manifestation of media inside of the world of the personal unconscious, right? Because Hank Warden is playing the waiter in the same way that he plays every character that he's ever played with his catchphrases from every movie that he's ever been in, right? And so they're literally it's a guest feature in somebody's mind. It is a guest appearance, right? At the very least, it's a guest appearance by this character actor, right? Real life cowboy, but character actor nonetheless, that is doing his shtick, right? It's very strange. And there are instances where things like that happen, and you go, and how is this possible inside of this narrative? It's not. It's not possible. It's only possible when you have a framework to work with. Then it's possible. It's plausible why you would use things from films that you see, right? Comforting things that you see, things that you liked, people that you liked. And so thereby you give them these positive characteristics, right? Um, much like in the searches, right? Like his character is he's crazy, but he's the comic relief and he's fun, right? Much in the same way that he's fun when Agent Cooper gets shot and he doesn't seem to notice that, and it's this comedic scene that plays out, and then same, right? Ironically enough, isn't it weird that we sort of get it's a strange set of events that we either get Mike's noise from Hank Warden doing the sound from the searchers, and or they had Mike, if you believe that the man from another place is in fact Mike, or that the man from another place is doing that because of the sound that they make during the movie The Searchers that he was in. Either way you splice it, it's this big stew of media informant that's happening in the personal unconscious that can't otherwise happen. Why is that actor there? So My thoughts on those characters showing up at those certain times. I mean, I think that it's fairly obvious that when you apply the framework to it, why those characters have to be there at those times, it's because those characters are part of the intuition. Those characters are like they're initiating the intuition of the dreamer to pull this thing together.
Um, the other option is that the show is exploring what I'm going to paraphrase Briggs. That there's more on Earth than what the mind can actually logically process. There's more going on potentially. Like when you listen to the radio or something, there's radio waves moving around us and through us, and there's all kinds of things that we can't quite see or you know absorb with our five limited senses. So it could be that the show is just dealing with extra dimensional things or supra dimensional things or just esoteric things in general. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be because one way to explain logically all the things that are quote unquote impossible is that nothing's impossible in the unconscious or in the sort of dream space. But another way to explain it is that there's weird stuff happening like all around us while we're consciously moving through life. And maybe this is a show that is exploring, those dimensions that we can't quite typically get our hands around.
Or we could do it like this. Briggs is the Jungian archetype of the wise old man. He literally, if you read the Jungian archetype of the wise old man, that's what he represents. There are parts in the show where he will abruptly stop the entire show to recite monologues that inform you of the fact that he is acting as that. He is guiding the young, right? Not the young, but the young, into pulling them into a place of tradition and hierarchy and to become oneself. He's informing that, right? So you've got that, and then you have the waiter, and to a degree you have the giant slash the fireman who is acting as the wizard, right? So another Jungian archetype that literally plays onto itself. One of the interesting things that Jung says about the wizard is sometimes the wizard comes to you, much like Yoda. They use it the same way. Sometimes the wizard comes to you in the form of the fool, and you mistake the fool. You mistake that archetype, and so the wizard has done this on purpose to test you. And given the nature of your reaction, right, your purity, then the wizard might then reveal himself and then guide you. And there you go. So I think that a lot of what's happening is the things that inform intuition, they are now put together on behalf of the defense mechanism, Cooper, right, who's conducting this investigation into self, so that we can use this intuition, the most resourceful guides of that in that moment, right, and then move forward. Likewise, I mean, if you play the archetype game, right, with Jung, where where he extensively talks about it in the vast majority of the body of his work, he doesn't, he'll talk about it in the book The Archetypes. He talks clearly about like the actual formal layout of what these various archetypes do, and there's a lot of crossover, right?
Yeah,
Because
but
life is not.
I was, with my last observation, I was opening the doorway to another way into this show that's not Jungian, that's not personal unconscious, that's not dream at all. Um, do you have any thoughts on that at all,
Well,
or
I
is the
think.
instinct always to snap back? And I'm not saying that critically at all. Is the instinct always to snap back to the Jungian
Well,
stuff?
no, I do have thoughts on that, and in fact, there's going to come about a place where you're with your own two eyes. Lynch in his personal life gets invested into physics, right? He starts to
Mhm.
really dig physics, so he starts to pull that in to the work, and that happens like all throughout his career. He doesn't really, he doesn't want he doesn't really want a scientific understanding of it per se, as much as the cornerstone ideas. And that's how we get things like superposition happening in Fire Walk with Me. And then it will retain, right? We'll understand that superposition is an occurrence. However, metaphorically speaking, like everything that you decide is its own sort of like computational superposition. That's why it makes sense to me that we would use it for computers, right? We could actually employ we could do that. We could use quantum mechanics to make this many decisions become this one the minute that we decide on one, and then it happens instantaneously. But it could be everywhere at one time until we've made that decision, and there it is, right? Well, the same is true with the brain. You know, you have 200 choices laid out before you, and it's the one you go with that becomes the actual thing. It is now the thing. Nothing else was the thing until it is, right? So you're not wrong. You're not wrong to suggest, well, there's beats of that that's already inside of there. But I think where we are in the show, with Mark Frost as the showrunner, and where we are in that scene, when we talk about the lead into their confrontation with Leland, where we're at in that show, I think that that's sort of operating on the principle of Jungian archetypes, right? And not in the Jordan Peterson way. We're not taking a piece of media, and we've discussed this a little bit, but we're not taking a piece of media and going like, now let's analyze it through Jungian philosophy.
Yeah.
We're not doing that. What we're doing is what Frost is doing, I believe, is he's literally showing you, no, these are the actual archetypes, and they are actually in the personal unconscious now as we speak. And this is what the faces of those archetypes look like to this person in their personal unconscious. And it would look different to you because yours is, like it says, personal, right? And that's what I think is happening. And I think that those specific characters have to be doing that.
But
Much in the
but
same way that, you know, look, the log lady is going to serve the same purpose as the wise old woman, right? And it's going to be very clear that that's the archetype of the wise old woman who knows things she can't possibly know, just just as we spoke.
speaking of wise old woman, I'm putting a cozy blanket over myself.
I
Yeah.
think
Hey, and I just realized randomly, look, it has a look at the pattern on this
the
blanket.
chevron pattern on it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's total coincidence,
Yeah.
I
So I was
think.
out today and I have a fancy who killed Laura Palmer shirt, right? And it's very obnoxious. It's like who killed, and then it's an entire it's the whole picture of Laura Palmer, the iconic image, right? And then underneath it says Laura Palmer. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking, and where do we go? We went to like uh just random store. We went to like Target or something, right? Now, in my mind, I know that when other people see me, I'm a social justice warrior. I'm walking around, right? And like I'm like doing this service and I'm exploiting this case that is unsolved and must be solved. And I know that like other people are like they're looking at my shirt and then they're looking down, right? Because they don't want to be asked about it. Where I turn to them and be like, don't hide your face. You see this. You see this. You live with it, right?
Right, yes.
But then even worse than that, I know that at some point, because I'm wearing this shirt, someone's going to come along and they're going to go like, "Oh, that's a nice shirt." And now I'm obligated to be this guy. I have a show about this stuff. Do you want to listen to my show? I got a show that I do about Twin Peaks. I talk about it. Do you want to listen to it?
It's like, no, why? Like you do that for fun?
Yeah.
Like you have nothing else to do? Like it's not enough to just watch the show?
Right. What do they pay you for that? I got to go.
Oh, then you talk about it on your free time, and then you also talk about it on like camera time.
Yeah,
Hey,
no,
there,
this part, this is not the pathetic part. The pathetic part was a few hours ago when we were doing this show already. And we're just doing it on the phone. You know, right? Like, look, but look, in all sincerity, um, I do like it enough to do that, you know. Okay, so let me flip on its head for a second. They all walk in. When you saw Briggs, obviously there's something there that you looked at and went, "Huh, what was going through your head with that?"
like in the Roadhouse?
Yes.
I really don't know. I really don't know. I thought it was great drama, um, ex extreme like sort of tension building, um, and classic whodunit type stuff. But he's just a character that he was probably my favorite character the first time I ran through the show. And there's
Sure.
something about him that's just draws you in. And he's was he often paired with the waiter? You know, he's
No,
kind of paired with the
no.
fireman later on. So there's something interesting going on with him. Like he is connected to the higher ups in some way. And also, when Leland is dying and Bob is trying to get out of him or whatever's happening there, they there's a lot of reference to they. So they wanted us to, or they are asking us to. So there's a lot of like they versus they type things happening, which is interesting. So team versus team. So I'm not exactly sure of the role that Briggs is playing, but he doesn't seem to be your average runner. I mean, he's obviously very accomplished as a human being, but he doesn't seem to be your average accomplished human being. He seems to be in touch with something else or have some
Well,
sort of capabilities. And it's possible that he has knowledge through his work of things that most people, don't have access to. Not
well,
just technical like governmental secret knowledge, but like other he might have just uncovered things that most people can't. I'm trying to take the show a little bit literally at this point, which is hard to do because there's so much esoteric and sort of supernatural type stuff happening. But
so you're
he,
putting yourself through an exercise to see like if you can just watch it. But see that, but again, there's folks who do that to themselves, and they elect to decide. Look, this universe of Twin Peaks is real inside Twin Peaks. That's what it is. That's it. Just The Sopranos are real when you watch The Sopranos. Twin Peaks is real when you watch Twin Peaks. The problem is Twin Peaks told you that that's not true. So if you're gonna take this show literally, right? If you're gonna take its word for it, then you've also got to contend with the fact that we live inside a dream.
yeah, but there could be sort of a flashing on, flashing off, different like jumping between different types of worlds stuff happening. And I think there might be some of that going on in the Mr. C and Jeffrey scene, which we're going to get to in a minute. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be either or. I think there might be a lot of back and forth type things happening.
No,
So
well, look, man, the only thing I think you can actually corroborate, and you can't even pick which ones they are, is that in the framework of the personal unconscious, you are inclined to use people from your real life in the personal unconscious, right? You are also inclined to use celebrities or stories that you know of, or things that, wallpaper that was at your grandmother's house and you had good experiences with that, whatever the situation might be, right? So you pull from these levels of different aesthetics, but that's the only indication I would think that when you say something is real, it could be real, because otherwise everything contradicts itself. There is no rule within inside of the universe that is steady and stays true. It all folds over on itself until it is no longer even the same version of itself, and now a new version that you're not privy to exists, right? And so it's hard to take anything that happens with inside of the show to be a real place. There are people who they believe that the return is somebody's subpsychic domain, but that other things were real. I think you have just as much evidence to say that it's more likely it was never the case than it is that some of it was, right? Because it's the only explanation to make the entire thing fulfilled. Otherwise, you could never start to evaluate which was what. There are too many instances where it just wouldn't make sense, right? People don't have real identical cousins. Television shows have identical cousins, right? People don't people can't break out a guitar and a full band starts playing because they're in a musical. Musicals have musicals, right? It's these The intuition to suddenly be able to see the manifestation of evil when you can see Bob, or be able to see the hands that pull the locket, or whatever the case is. There's all these things that can't possibly be the case, and then the rules for themselves turn in on themselves, right? If you go, well, I can take that at face value just like I can take Bewitched at face value. Bewitched is not going to defy its own rules. It creates its rules, and those are the rules. At no point is Darren going to walk in and go, you're not real, right? You were never here. You know that, right? We don't got a kid. This is not a thing. You're not a witch. You're not here. Like at no point will that happen in Bewitched. But it'd be cool if it did.
The grandson in the Tremont house has cream corn in his hand, and then he doesn't. And then later, Donna comes back to the house, and he's not there, and the grandma's not there, and some other lady's there. And she's like, I don't know who you're talking about, but I do have something from Harold Smith for you in an
Right.
envelope. Um, I don't need to get into that right now, but that was just interesting that Donna's going to a Tremont household, and the people she expected to find there are not there, like sort of shades of part eight, the end of the series.
Sure.
But anyway, let's go to season three, part 15, and I'm gonna just do a little setup before Mr. C, the Cooper double character,
You know what I
Mark
just thought
Cooper.
about? I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say this aloud, because there's just no way you could never find it. But what if the Tremonts and the Chalfonts, what if those are the names of the dreamer's respective parents' actual names, her two given families, right? These esoteric, non-existent, Logian, clearly Logian, because an interesting thing happens. You
French.
can,
Yeah.
yeah, you can so they superimpose the names of those two a lot, right? But also what's happening is we're also given a chronology of when they're there, indicating that maybe it is two different sets. Very hard to say, right? You can never follow that thread. There's no way that you could ever follow that thread. But it's an interesting, why these names? Why is that important? Important enough that we're gonna do a lot of it. Why
Yeah.
that?
I mean, as important as any other names possible, because the very end of the show calls those names back. And also, we see her, we see that wallpaper come back in the scene we're about to talk about. The famous wallpaper from the Chalfont
What a
painting,
hell of
or
a
from the Tremont
transition,
painting.
right? I wish you had a commercial to go to, my man. Right? It's on. What an unfair life. You're gonna make a transition just like that. You should have been able to pitch like castor oil right there. You know what I mean? You know what? If you want to, the floor is yours. I'm all for it. I'm for it. If you got something
you
to pitch, you're not even making money on this son of a bitch, but why not?
you That's all right. So Otis Redding, we had a brief mention of him in a previous conversation. This time, Otis Redding does show up in the soundtrack, and we get the shot of the clouds in the heavens. And then right after that scene, and of course, I'm talking about Ed and Norma reuniting. We get the crunchy electricity. Now, this is the Dean Hurley electricity that he recorded in Poland. And then we get a shot of the road. Bearded men appear, at least one beard, I think a couple of bearded men appear outside of the Dutchman's. They seem expectant. They're ready for Mr. C to show up. It seems like one of them guides Mr. C or Dark Cooper or Cooper Double or whatever you want to call him up the stairs. There's electricity crackling again, and then they fade away, sort of a similar to how Cooper fades away in the in his conversation with the fireman in part one. It's a very cool effect. Then there's a fade out to the woods. At first, I thought I misremembered. I thought the Dutchman's actually like becomes the woods and back and forth, but it's actually a separate shot. So the Dutchman's fades away and the woods shows up, and then it fades back in. Cooper's meeting a very, very, very black suited watchman, who pulls the trigger. He pulls like the lever to make the electricity jump. And this is in the room that has the same wallpaper as the famous painting.
Sure.
Um, Cooper says, "I'm looking for Phillip Jeffries," and then that guard is drooling. He's drooling even more than the drunk in the jail cell. Unrelated, but just interesting how much he's drooling. It's weird. And then another guard comes out and uh, he shows up. He's kind of shabbier. He's kind of like more grungy looking. And the guy who pulled the lever bangs a stick once, and then Cooper enters with the new guard. But in the meantime, we got like this weird shot of the jumping man with like a really shaky camera. There's a flashing of Sarah's face, I think, that goes across the jumping man's face. That's been pretty well documented.
Yeah.
And there's like this super high speed, almost like a tape playing in reverse. Just all the aesthetics and all the mood setting is just it's just incredible. Whether it means anything, I have no idea. Then they take this longish walk to another doorway, and then that shot transitions with a shot of the woods. They seem to be transposed together. So almost like two things are happening at once. They go through the doorway, they go up the stairs, they go to another door. Now they're on a rooftop. It seems like there's two woodsman guards. They lead him to room 8. It's locked. All of a sudden, the bosomy woman appears like kind of out of nowhere. This person is not blackened, but is of course super weird looking. It's a guy who's described as a bosomy woman, and he's not very bosomy at all. He says in reverse backward voice, "I'll unlock the door for you." He unlocks it. The
I
door
believe
opens
that that
inward.
that is a woman, right? That's an actress. She was
No, yeah, no, that is an actor. That's a man. It's a male actor. So
Oh no, I'm you know what? I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it when it touches or what have you.
yeah, but it's just really weird. The door opens inward, and then Mr. C goes in. The camera lingers for quite a while, actually, until Mr. C completely shuts the door. Very interesting lingering there. Then he's in the hotel room number 8. It seems like a foyer type space with like a lot of buzzy light. There's like an overhead um, uh, fluorescent light that's kind of classic Peaksian or Lynchian buzzing going on. Mr. C stares at a wood paneled wall and there's a radiator. And then I thought misremembered like the wall actually retracts. And then we see Jeffries, but that's not happening at all. The wall's not retracting, but something else is like a screen type thing seems to be blending over it. Whatever it is, we get a reveal of this modern version of the Jeffries character. Interestingly, the radiator, you could still kind of see it. So that wall is there, but it's just hard to see. And it's sort of like flickering in and out during the Jeffries scene. Jeffries and his room seems to be filmed in black and white. It might be like a light sepia. I'm not sure. It looks black and white to me. But that's the whole setup. And then they have their conversation. So if you want to jump in.
Well, so let's start at the beginning. So I'm not sure what sort of linear layout your questions will, nor do I know what your questions will be. But
Mhm.
so let's find in this scene.
And I will say this friggin' blew me away the first time I saw this scene. I
Yeah.
mean, this was just absolutely pure ecstasy,
So
from an
obviously,
enjoyment
this scene,
perspective.
everything that happens in this scene, though some things are revealed to us, like oh my goodness, so the wallpaper, okay, so the convenience store, some things while it's revealed to us, it is one of those Lynchian scenarios by which you have one reveal and end up with 200 more questions, right? And what a glorious game. What a glorious game, a glorious legacy that I hope is never solved. But if we take it from the top, and I'm not, like I said, I have no idea what your questions are, or like where do they begin? If they begin in the conversation itself, or if you sort of wanted to break down, what is the fabric of this? But I think there's two important things. I always think There are two important things if you're going to do analysis and watch the show for that purpose, and I think that that's valid with anything. I think there's always two places that you're looking to go. And the first place is like, what does this have to do with the story proper? The story that
Mm.
I'm watching, what is this? Right? Because that's always as vague as, and what does it mean? So when we look at like what happens in the show proper, we're talking about the narrative, the characters' motivations, what they're attempting to do, and why. And then when we talk about and what does it mean, that's kind of the theoretical framework that people will place over it, right? In this case, it's this idea that Twin Peaks is a show that takes place in the personal unconscious by way of Jungian ideology for the soul, the future of the person that is performing this personal unconscious drama to see if they reach individuation. So we can track both of these things on this scene. And I think it's important to do that. Ironically enough, it's very difficult to not use a framework in order to decode what's happening. And I'll
Mm.
start with this. Wouldn't you know it? Carl Jung had stuff to say about the Flying Dutchmans. Wouldn't you know it? And so when we look at this space that we refer to as the Dutchmans, if we ask ourselves, okay, well, clearly there's a reference there to the Flying Dutchman. And then, we say, well, what is that old story? Well, it's a story about hubris and trying to, a captain of a ship who faces a storm that no man can face. And so he does, and everybody dies in the process. And as punishment, he is left to sail the same seas over and over again to the end of time, never to beat the storm, but never to really survive ever again, right? So it's a cyclical thing. Carl Jung uses this story to say, right, you can be in a repressive state of cyclical behavior that's exactly like the Flying Dutchman's, right? You can use the Flying Dutchman sort of as a place that you now inhabit where you continue to do the same thing expecting a different result. You continue to behave in these patterns of trauma that you've taught yourself using the same excuses that you've taught yourself. I think that the Dutchman's itself is a place of cyclical negative behavior. It's interesting. You called it a rooftop. I feel like once we realize, oh, okay, so perhaps the room, I believe that what we're seeing is we're seeing the woodsman outside of the room where Laura Palmer walks in. And so we're recognizing like this space, that's the Dutchman's. Ironically enough, it's also the space above the convenience store, which means one of the rooms that is in that hotel surrounding area is the space that we witness when the lodge, when all the lodge people are having their meeting that Jeffries says that he's in on, which would make sense because now Jeffries is there and he knows how to get there, right? Okay, so perhaps that as a foundation lays out. Okay, so why do you need to go to this place and what is going on with that, and that's show stuff. And then what does this have to do with the dreamer and how does this help you with anything?
Yeah.
I think the over, if we take it top down, I think the overall idea here is to rupture this cycle. You called it a rooftop. I always got the impression it was a motel parking lot, right? Like your garden variety, like it's like laid out like this, right? So you'd go park and then you'd walk up to the gravel driveway and there's the there's the motel,
Yeah,
right?
because I mean you don't have hotel rooms on top of a rooftop, but they did ascend to get there. So that's why I always have that feeling that
Oh,
it's
I,
on
I
top of
understand.
something else. Yeah.
But it's almost like it's in the same way that they walked into a space that didn't exist above this convenience store that didn't exist.
Yeah.
They walked into this next space that didn't exist. They're all ground level in some way, right? Um, so clearly, the place above the convenience store where they lived, how did they live there? Because it's a motel, right? That's how they live there. Because the thing above the convenience store is the Dutchman's, and if you go, that's there's different. I think behind those doors are different traumas right? Whether they be represented as what actually happened to this dreamer that would make them sort of have this cognitive dissonance, and or not, whether or not they're metaphorical representations of it. But I think behind all of those doors is traumas. And so I think that Jeffrey's job is to break this cycle. And in somehow he's fortified himself and learned to use the metaphysics, the uncanny metaphysics of this location to be able to manipulate time in the same way that they can, but his purpose is to do so. So in this perfect moment in time, he can break them of this trauma, right? And this time seems to all be contingent on Judy's return. I think a lot of what happens with the 25 years is not just, well, we have a contract with you, Mr. C, and you must come back in 25 years. I'm not thinking Mr. C was ever going to be a guy who followed the contractual obligation, much less Bob, right? So something has to be the reason to the show Twin Peaks. Something has to be the reason why everybody's like, and in 25 years, obviously, this is all going to be different. You better come back then. Maybe they need him to come back before Judy returns because God forbid that Judy and Bob get back together. Maybe the shit really hits the fan and no one will ever be able to do anything to stop them from that point forward. I think there's something to do with Judy's arrival in 25 years. I really haven't heard anybody say that, but otherwise, I can't seem to understand what would make of all the things in Twin Peaks, what would make the lodge entities go, that Mr. C, he can be counted on to come back in 25 years, no problem. We'll see you next time, pal. Why? And if Mike wants to be with Bob again so desperately, why wait? Right? So I think it has to do with that. And I think that Jeffrey's job, I also think that Jeffrey's given the understanding of the non-reality, whether or not he understands the totality, whether or not, Jeffries is David Bowie or otherwise, goes, I got it. I got it. We're all archetypes. I mean, we're alive. I can pinch myself. We're alive, but not really. And there's this person, and we're basically synaptic responses to what this person is going through. They don't even know that this personal unconscious trauma is happening. They're just playing out these things, and we're sort of the representatives of the various hormones or repressions or complexes or whatever the case might be, and we help play this thing out. And if she taps into this, this is how she would see it. I don't think that Jeffries knows that, but Jeffries in his understanding that this is not the way that things really are. I think that puts him into a unique position to then be able to manipulate things. And then we'll later on see that Cooper basically does the same thing. He does so with Jeffrey's help, but regardless of that, Cooper then has boom, the understanding of what the game is about suddenly shifts when that happens. So I think Jeffries has got himself holed up there on purpose, right? Weirdly, and I don't know if you've seen this before. I've seen lots of people interpret it. Well, Jeffries is like he's part of this. He's the smoke, right? And I always thought, wow, no, I think Jeffries is a grown man who's in this machine that's slippery, and I think he's activating the machine. But I think that Jeffries, the guy, is stuck in that machine. I don't know if I can know that, right? But was your take that the machine is Jeffries, or when he says it's slippery in here, was your take that Jeffries is in there?
I went back and forth between he's either the machine or the smoke or the circle or
So you did go with he's the
or
circle.
some entity that's sort of in the room in some way. Not that Jeffrey, not that like a human being is inside a slippery machine. I always thought slippery was like metaphorical for concepts or time or things
Well,
like that.
well, certainly, but I also think that it works like a lot of other things in the show,
What
right? Where it's
but why
both.
why would he be in there? Like, is he self-imposed himself in there? Is he imprisoned in some way? Is he hiding? Why would a human being be in a machine like that?
So there's going to be some things about this
And
that
and of
we can.
course we see many machines later in the show.
Sure.
or maybe previously in the show. But
So there's some things we're going to be able to speculate on, and then there's some things we're just not. I mean, we could speculate till but we don't even have enough information really to speculate.
let me apologize for interrupting you. But the the urgency or the stress with which Jeffrey says we live inside a dream, in Fire Walk with Me, and then of course they replay that scene. Um, he has like this realization that no one else around him seems to have, or he's speaking on a level, on a wavelength that no one else seems to be able to jive with, which
Multiple,
which is interesting
multiple.
because that makes your theory pretty cool as far as the Jeffries character goes. It's almost like if all these characters are elements of somebody's psyche, or however you want to say it, he's one that seems to recognize, to some extent, recognize that fact. And you are right, because later Cooper, or some version of Cooper, makes the same comment, and with a different tone, in a different way, in a different setting. But um, yeah, are they like, is that archetypal characters waking up to the fact that that's who they are, that
No,
they're not
I
as
don't. I don't think
autonomous?
so. I don't think so. I don't think that we can. I don't think we can necessarily. Well, here's what I know. We can't definitively state that, right? What we can definitively state is that, as opposed to the reality that they lived in every day, they suddenly become keenly aware that is not reality.
Has that ever
That's what
happened
we.
to you?
What did you say?
As I chew this banana, has that ever happened to you?
Well, that's what makes it Jungian, isn't it? Right now, I mean, granted, I
No, I
understand.
mean that literally. I mean, have you ever had the experience of,
I understand where you're coming from,
you know,
and let me say this: I understand that Frost was not involved whatsoever with Fire Walk with Me, and so it's rather audacious for me to use things that Frost would have embedded in these characters, or these ideas of the show already, right? But we are working. Look, I said before, and I'll say again: David Lynch has no lack of material that proves that he is all about investigating people's the snap when somebody is suddenly they have identification issues and cognitive dissonance, and so what they do is they transfer their issues metaphorically into other characters that they become and they assume for the purpose of not being able to handle it or to reintegrate or whatever the case might be. Clearly, that had a profound effect on the way that he.
I'm about to piss you off, and everyone who's listening to this, because you're
Oh, I
about to
can't.
go into
I can't
a
wait.
good thing. But
That sounds great.
one time you said, you don't believe any of the scenes in Mulholland Drive actually happened. Do you still feel that way?
They didn't happen. None of the scenes you're watching in Mulholland Drive happen. That's obvious. That's not even open to debate.
It is open to debate.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Sure it is.
No, it's not.
Sure it is. She's
No,
sitting
it's
there
not.
making coffee, all beat up, depressed. We get
Dude,
the
the beginning of Mulholland Drive ends
Patrick
with
Fischler scene.
the beginning of Mulholland Drive. It begins with her death. The end of Mulholland Drive ends with her death. She dies at the very beginning. The whole thing's a death dream. That's made clear to us. One of the most clear things that's ever been made to us. I don't even see how it could be open for speculation. Of all the things that have ever been strange for us to have to wrap our head around, that's not one of them, right?
We'll come back to that another day, and we
I
will.
mean, for Christ's sake, how does she end up in that bed? By the spirit, the apparition of disappointment of these elderly people who manifest from small entities to gigantic to, I mean, come on. Like the whole thing, that's where we end up. Again, that movie is perfect. Not only is it a perfect film, but it's perfect to showcase this very aligned concept that's happening with the return. It's very aligned in its ideology because It's an evaluation of things that happen to this person, but it's not when you see it. It's an evaluation. The evaluation is still occurring. It's just that it's the Carrie Page moment, right? So when you see that she really evaluates like what did she do and she hired this hitman and how did it really work out and all of that stuff, that's still evaluation. Because the surreal elements then reinterject themselves during that evaluation process and things that cannot be suddenly are, right? So we're still watching it from an analytical perspective. In that case, though, I think Lynch is just, he begins the thing as he ends it. We're hitting the pillow because the shot was just fired. It's just you didn't know it yet, right? We're hitting the pillow. That's where we open up. And then where we end up is we hear the shot get fired.
Yeah, the death dream concept that never really makes a lot of sense to me. Um, just as far as time goes. So we get a 2.5 hour movie that takes place in a millisecond.
Well, again, look, it's David Lynch, brother. We can't if you're going to start to decipher, well, that can't happen. So this whole let's chuck this whole thing out. It's like, well, there's no lack of instances where you're going to be confronted with that.
I mean, is that the Lost Highway thing too? Like, it's a 2.5 hour movie that takes place in a millisecond.
I don't think so. No, I think with Lost Highway, I
Doesn't
think
do it for
that
me.
would you say?
That doesn't do it for me. Although, I mean, I'm not saying it can't be that. It just doesn't sit right.
No, I think it takes place from his jail cell to the moment that he gets electrocuted. I think he's got plenty of time to pontificate on the circumstances. But again, there's a perfect example of how you're seeing somebody in their mind reconstructing something that didn't happen. Now, the difference here is he tells you it didn't happen that way. He tells you he prefers to not think about it the way that it actually happened, right? So that makes you comfortable with it. Well, he does the same thing with Mulholland Drive, right? But the point in all of that is, when I hear, well, this is him in the moment of the electric chair the entire time. It's like it doesn't necessarily have to be that. At the point where the murder's been committed and he's essentially the fabric of his brain has come unglued, that onto itself could be the moment where he's going through all of these things, absolving himself from the guilt of what happened, and now he's seen it outside of himself, which hints the videotape. It's all of that. I'm with you on that one. I don't think that necessarily has to all occur while he's on the chair. How long has he been in jail? What do you mean? The death penalty takes forever to fulfill, right?
Can Jeffries quote unquote manipulate time because he's conscious of living in a dream when no one else around him is?
Sort of. So I think what
And sorry
Jeffries,
if these are too crunchy.
yeah, you're fine.
I'm like ravenous right now.
I think that what Jeffries becomes aware. Well, look, first of all, Jeffries clearly understands that the current chronology must change, right? Or he would not be on board with that. Since he's capable of changing the events of the past and then rupturing the events of the future, for him to go ahead and participate in it must mean that he feels that that's going to go to a positive. Now, my belief is while you're watching the show that the entire point is to get them to cross over into that new point of consciousness. It's not exactly consciousness, right? But it's a conscious layer that looks more like reality than not, much like you see with Mulholland Drive. Same, right? The only difference here is there are still archetypal beings that are allowed to run free inside of this because the point of getting Carrie Page back to her house is confrontation therapy. It's confrontation therapy because the erroneous idea that you can change your understanding of the things that happened to you in the past and then suddenly it will fix the way that you behave in the future. That's not necessarily it. It's confrontation therapy. It's you have to confront the things that happened in your past, stare them down, and decide, is this worth carrying? Right? So he is he is capable of changing the fabric of that reality because he understands that it's not necessarily reality. As to what he believes he is, that's where I said before. Some things we're gonna, you're not to know, and you won't. Like we have no idea. It's like the debate of whether or not he's actually in the machine or not. I think that his voice being processed and stuff like that, and given the words that he uses, it implicates to me that he is in the machine and he's still a man. But we don't know that, and there's no way to know that. So, what does he see himself as once he's now that he understands this place above the convenience store where this meeting occurred must have something to do with my understanding that none of the rest of this is real, but they can manipulate factors. That, and he knows Judy. And what his understanding of Judy is, we don't really know. We just know that he knows Judy, right? But that also says what? That Judy was around 25 years ago, left 25 years ago, comes back, and the hunt is on to find Judy.
Why does it say that?
What do you mean?
Why does that? Why does that suggest that she was there? And then I'm going to say she, just for lack of a better pronoun,
It is she.
um, that she was there, left, and then came back.
Well, because his interaction with Judy, well, a few things implicate that. So, number one, Bob Bob is driving Mr. C to look for Judy and not necessarily sharing the information of what that means, because at the point that Bob has gotten back together with Judy, Mr. C has worn out his utility. Bob will not need Mr. C anymore. So Bob seems unclear about who Judy is. Well, we know or Mr. C is unclear about who Judy is, and Bob seems to want to drive him toward coordinates that will most likely lead him to Judy. The way that we know that is that those coordinates lead to the Palmer house. What Mr. C and what Bob didn't know was that Judy was there at the Palmer house. Had Bob known that, he could have just gone to the Palmer house. But they don't know. Now, why wouldn't Bob know? So that would implicate to me that Judy hasn't been around very much. Judy's the experiment, right? So perhaps this is from mother to a more manifest body here on Earth. The manifest body here on Earth is the experiment that comes through, and it comes through when it does, right? That would seem to me to be what's going on. Now, there's two schools of thought that it's either Judy who's talking to Mr. C saying I will be with Bob again and that they missed each other in New York, or it's Mike. My belief is that it's Mike. I don't think they want to tip off Mr. C that his utility is gone after the fact, right? In either case, Mr. C does not have a good fate that awaits him. From one perspective, he's being driven to find Judy from Bob, and Bob is not really sharing information. And we know that their dialogue is not exactly what you would assume that it is, because Mr. C is not even aware when Bob is still in there, if he's still with him, right? So we know that they don't dialogue how you would assume that they do, or
You're saying
Mr. C
Bob
and
and
Bob.
Mr. C. Yeah.
Yeah. If they did dialogue how we would assume that they would, right? Like they just have this psychic connection dialogue and they understand each other's motivations, then Mr. C wouldn't have to ask whether or not Bob is even still there. He didn't even know, right? And he was comforted by the fact that he seems to have he's more empowered because Bob is there, right?
Still with me. Yeah.
Yeah. So Bob is looking for Judy, but he's doing it through his host. As per usual, the host is the one that's been given the directive. And so that's where his coordinates lead. They don't lead to a place, they lead to a person. I mean, they do
So
in
if it were so important for this so-called Bob and this so-called Judy to get together, to have like this superpower or whatever, why would they not know where each other are is?
well, I think that the
And if
initial
it's so
plan,
important, and if it's so important for Mike to reunite with Bob, why would what would be the delay there? What is the delay in these two situations? Is it just that there's a show to make?
no, the delay is, well, it's twofold. So the delay's a justification. To the actual dreamer, the delay's a justification. This is all shit that we're going to make up to justify why for 25 years I fed into my worst behaviors, right? I let this shadow dominate my life and I acted in my worst impulses, right? And so the personal unconscious is playing a drama out. And the justification it's given itself is that for 25 years, Bob has not been able to reunite with Judy because Judy hasn't been there. Now, Bob has infiltrated Leland, and Judy has left an open window to infiltrate Sarah. And so it's an open window, but it's not utilized. It's when she returns, she can infiltrate Sarah, and then we see something approximating that as best as we can believe. The two of them are on the mission, so called in the personal unconscious, to hijack this human being and make them play to their worst impulses. This is a justification of self. This is you telling yourself, right, your personal unconscious, but you just utilizing justification behavior, right? Just, victim and traumatic behavior to say this is why I acted this way, right? But what you need is confrontation. What you need is confrontation. You got to stop absolving everybody. Well, you know what I mean? Because again, let's back all the way up, okay? For those of us playing at home, those who haven't heard, whatever. Let's back all the way up. If the dreamer is a person who had traumatic events happen to them, much like Laura Palmer does, and so with the exception of death, because she's dead and yet she lives, because the death is like more, it's more of like a death of potential, right? It's more like a guilty death. It's more like, look at what happened to me and you people did nothing. It's more like blame than it is anything else, right? Which you go through. It's a depressive stage, right? But this person they had similar to trauma as Laura Palmer. And so Laura Palmer is the like archetypal representation, the image, the unsullied image of potential that could have been, right? If this is what's going on, then this person is trying to absolve that trauma that they incurred by this person that most trusted them. I believe that the trauma that the dreamer faced was probably happened from her dad, and she is more inclined to be mad at her mother than she is to be mad with the dad, because the unbelievable circumstances that the father could actually do that immediately makes it, nope, it has to be the evil that men do. It's all these justifications that are occurring. Why? Because how could you live in a world where you could actually believe that something like that could happen to you? Right? The brain is trying to like justify this thing. The anger that's misplaced to the mother is, well, this person was sick, but you should have done something. This person was infiltrated. This person was infiltrated by their most evil, evil in its purest form, but you, the evil mother, you should have done something. You're the manifestation of all that is evil because you allowed for this to occur.
That doesn't sound misplaced. That sounds that portion of the blame sounds pretty legit to me.
It's hard to say. It's hard to say, right? Because like, is this mother that naive? I mean, we don't know what that external world looks like. You know what
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
saying? We don't, so we can't corroborate anything that I just said on paper, but we've
Yeah.
got a pretty good idea that these traumas kind of do fall in line, right? Because the show is about the nature of whether or not your shadow will overtake you or whether or not you'll have the courage to stand up to that. And in that pure courage, whether or not you'll be able to go on to the next level and live life, or, right? So by the time we're at where we're at, the shadow has been running amok for 25 years. The shadow has taken over. So on the external world of this person, that means that they've fallen victim to the cyclical pattern that awaits most people who go through that trauma, right? Because in most cases, Anthony, that's what happens. And so this person's is at a new point. Something has happened, good, bad, or indifferent. Something has happened that this person is at this point where they have to push beyond it. And so now the battle is, will the repression and the cycle and the darkness, will that win and you are this forever? Or will you cross that threshold into a new layer where things are not going to be how they were, and then confront this thing and decide to live an actual life? And so what Jeffries represents, the arbitration of the metaphor of the Flying Dutchmans, the place where these cyclical traumas are dispensed, right? So he's trying to arbitrate that. And their first plan goes awry. Their first plan is, well, let's just change the nature of the memory. Let's just change it. Let's change, metaphorically, it's like, well, we'll just make that thing that happened to you mean something entirely different. You're right. And like, that doesn't work. That doesn't work in your life. When you look back at it, we've all had instances where Everything that you thought was a dream. We've all had instances. I've had philosophical instances of that occur in my lifetime, politically speaking, philosophically speaking. Um, we've all had like information changes the nature of the dream you lived in yesterday, right? And it's going to be your decision. Now you've been confronted with the information. Are you going to continue to live in the dream? Are you going to justify the dream? Are you going to justify it now that you've seen what the real data says, or now that you've got this new piece of information? Are you going to go, that's not true? Nope, that's not true. That's not how it really. Are you going to do that? We know several people who do. We know lots of people who do,
Yeah,
right?
and you know what I do in that situation? I use my friend's metaphor. I say, here's the new door. I opened up a door to a new room, and you think you got the answer in this new room, and then you zoom out. The camera zooms way out, and it's like one of 20 rooms on one floor of a hotel that has 20 floors. So,
This is me. I'm a person that says that behaves in this fashion. When the information is real, it's real. And I don't get to absolve myself for having believed what was false. I don't get to blame it on the world, right? When presented with the actual information. If a person's not who you thought they were, and
mhm.
suddenly they you come to find out there's something entirely different. You can justify it. You can live in a traumatic experience and be in a cyclical pattern of behavior that will be abusive in a multitude of different ways. And I'm not just meaning in your relationships. I mean your best friends, your coworkers, your boss, your
Sure.
whatever this is. Well, you can choose to believe the falsity, or you're going to have to live like you understand the truth. And when you do that, then something's going to happen. Sometimes not always to the good. But if you live like things are true, that's how it's going to be, right? Metaphorically, it lines up with the
Yeah, but I
experience
mean, but
that
I've just seen. I respect that. I appreciate that very much. And I agree with what you're saying. But I've just seen too many instances of coming so-called out of one dream into some sort of reality. Like the dream was hijacked by reality, and then recognizing that, well, this new reality is just, maybe it's closer to some sort of objective truth or whatnot, but it's just seen it over and over and over with people I know, and things I've experienced, that it's not quite there.
well, I've
So I'm a
already
little more I'm a little more cautious in terms of feeling like I have a full grip on what the full real deal is,
yeah.
especially in terms of social things and whatnot. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Well, okay, so going back, ironically, this is kind of what Jung is on about, right? This, I mean, it's very similar to. You got to remember, we're dealing with somebody who's got such a prolific body of work. It's like there's when we're in the Jungian domain, there's hardly anything that the guy didn't think about, right? So if we're dealing about
Yeah.
stories and fairy tales and the way that complexes work and repressions and like how this applies to you and the way that you see it and the metaphors you tell yourself, the symbols you propagate, all of these things, right? We're going to come to a place on this show, Anthony, where we start talking about, well, what the hell's going on with all these circles in Twin Peaks? And I'm going to go, those are the mandala. Yeah, Jung thought about that too. He's got a name for it. He's got a name for when you put a bunch of symbols in your mind and they manifest as rings and they manifest as orbs, and they're golden orbs, and oh yeah, oh, he's written all about that, right? And it's hard to work your way out of the idea that Mark Frost, as a Jungian who understands all of these things that Jung is doing, wouldn't incorporate that. When it comes to Jeffries, he's trying to he's trying to break the cycle. And I think that's about as much as he understands. Now, if we had a hierarchy of understanding, I would say that the fireman understands more than everybody else. And I'm still not convinced that the fireman thinks of himself as anything else besides a real, autonomous, godlike, a deity, that can manipulate things and bring life, right? I don't think that he sees himself as just sort of the god archetype. I don't think he the creator archetype. I don't think he sees himself as that, right? I think he knows that all the stuff that they're doing is fake, right? But Cooper comes to find that out when he literally watches Twin Peaks the TV show and we see him do it, right? When he says we live inside a dream, he's watching Twin Peaks as a television show because that's what it is. It's a television show that plays in the personal unconscious. And that's his whiff of understanding to know, oh, that's a dream. That's a fault. That's false. Right? But then he still has to play out the beats of that television show because there's a purpose for that show trying to get what it's trying to get, which is making this person get closer and closer to the conscious level until they snap the hell out of this thing and move on with their life.
Is there a correlation between, say, a Jeffries or a Cooper waking up however you want to take it, and the dreamer waking up, like each of them waking up to their own respective realities? Is there a correlation there?
Yes, of course. In the same way that there's a correlation to like everybody being in different levels of dreams and what is their understanding of dreams. I mean, it happens to Audrey. The only difference is that she doesn't declare that she lived inside a dream, right? But clearly, whatever reality it is that she woke up into is not reality either, right? It can't, it's because it has no bearing on the actual narrative of anything. So, what does that even mean, right? But yeah, I think just as it's told to us repeatedly, hey, it's a dream. Hey, dream, is this a dream? As these characters, they bring this up all the time. So just like that's repeated, watching the characters snap out of it is also a reflection of what needs to happen. You need to understand this is fake. You need to understand this. You may not live in this cyclical pattern. You got to snap out of it. That's the first thing that's being said, right? And then it's like, it's saying, look, this is pretend, and the next thing is, wake up. You've got to wake up, right?
So, archetypally speaking, Jeffries is whom, what?
Jeffries, I have an interesting. So I've been tracking the Jeffries Cooper relationship for a long time, and I've done a lot of analysis on that and timelines and what it means. Ironically enough, we're operating from the perspective that what happened in Fire Walk with Me actually happened 25 years later and is more like a reflection of the personal unconscious than anything else. That goes back to validate why Jeffries is accusing Cooper of being Mr. C and having that information whatsoever. So what we're talking about is plus we see instances where we see the Cooper who's trapped in a different linear time and what have you. So we know this is a reflection, right? So when we look at all of this stuff, we look at like Jeffrey's central motivation. Let me ask you, from the perspective of themes that we come into contact with a lot, right? And you mentioned one, right? What do you think is the most important primary theme that gets repeated often, whether it's a metaphor, whether it's just a common occurrence? What to you is the most put in your face, or even symbols, for that matter?
Symbol wise, I would say for the Jeffries thing, the number 8 and the infinity sign. But as far as like the main theme of the show, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, sort of. I'm saying, well, yeah. I mean, if you consider the thing that's being said to you the very most, whether it be in metaphor or not, to be the theme
it
of the show itself.
it might be the Briggs line from the previous scene that we talked about, which I don't have the exact quote, but Mark Frost said it in a different way in one of his books, and that was like, think about all the microscopic things on Earth that we can't interact with, um, but they're there. We can't see them. They're there, and they have lives, etc. And he's like, well, what if we are that, to some other entity? So I guess that there's more than meets the eye. I would say maybe that's possibly the primary theme or the one of the main ideas of the whole show.
Yeah.
It's not that deep, but there's maybe just pause for a moment and respect the fact that there's more than meets the eye
Yeah. Well,
without getting bogged down by that. It's very easy to get bogged down. You could pay homage to that idea. You could respect it, move on with your life, just like kind of respecting the weather, Mother Nature, the ocean, what it can do. It doesn't have to stop you in your tracks. Just something to be aware of. I'm sure the show is much deeper than that in many different ways, but that's just the first thought I'm having. How about you?
well,
As far
yeah.
as
I mean,
main as
look,
far as main ideas, possibly a central idea.
the main idea is that you're responsible for your reality. That's the main idea of the show to me, is that you're responsible for your reality. And it's an investigation into the nature of what reality you're going to choose, right? This person is a hyper real, Mark Frost words, hyper real series of things that can't be true, right? It's like it's everything at its most maximum, right? Laura can interact with people with disabilities credibly. She's allowed to do that. Laura can take meals to the elderly and the sick. Laura can have a full-time job. Laura can go to therapy. Laura's the homecoming queen and the most popular girl that's there. Laura has an uncanny charm, a witchcraft-like ability to bring everybody into her periphery. She's the most sweet, most disastrous person that you've ever met. She's also got an almost evil way of manipulating people and destroying them from the inside out. She's got a drug problem, and she's got a rampant drug problem. She's a sex addict for
There's a lot of
no
che-
reason.
there's a lot of cheating. I'm going to come back to that thought later, but go ahead.
She's all of these things at its most maximum, which is not really any of us. It's not any of us. It's your person. It's the thing inside of your head at its most maximum, and then she starts to attribute these things to various characters on the show, right? So you're introduced to her as all the most maximum of all of these things. She's the most tragic, most beloved. She's the greatest. She's the worst, right? She's the most put together. She is the absolute craziest of them all. It's all of that, and then it becomes all of these different people. You're responsible for the thing that you end up becoming. Which one of these are you going to be? What's your identity? Who are you? What is the real thing? What year is this? What are we going with? What are we doing? Right? Is this a dream? Are you going to continue to live under the bullshit of like you want to be 10 things, but what are you? Right? And as you know, if you spend a lot of your life sort of caught in that middle place of trying to decide which of these things that you are, that's the worst thing you can possibly do. You got to make a choice and go with it because you can't know whether or not that door is locked unless you get all the way down the hallway, right? You got to sort of pick a choice and go with it, and that's going to be how you start to successively put things together. Now, if you add trauma to all of that, it's almost 100%, man. It's almost 100% that you're going to live in that cyclical thing that's going to eat you alive. But this one's not. She's fighting. She's fighting like hell, and she continues to tell herself over and over and over again that she's got to snap out of it, right? So the central theme to me has always been, you are responsible for the future. In fact, that to me, over a decade ago, when I was first sort of going like, okay, I'm gonna try, I'm gonna really start to philosophize, and I've tried other people's theories, and let me see, what I can. Even a decade ago, it was clear to me like the central premise is something to do with who you really are, right? That's the central premise. Now, what is the construct that they're using to get to this question? And then, the watching Mark Frost discuss it with lots of people under the sun and the way that he speaks to like his contributions and what that really meant and the way that he constructed the narrative and what he would choose to use. That's how I found. Yeah, it wasn't a, it's not a guesstimation like on my behalf, and it just so happens Mark Frost has corroborated some of it. It's like, no, it's me watching what he's talking about, right? Him talking about the psychology of the show. What does that tell you? That it's psychological. Why is it psychological? Because it's happening in somebody's mind, right? Um, those kind of things. Anyway, so we are on the interaction between Jeffries and Mr. C. Do you want to pop the lid open on that interaction, or is that not?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, if you have more questions, go ahead with it, or if you want
Now,
to
one
say
of the things
some other.
I was just thinking in my head earlier was that there's a lot of sort of storytelling cheating going on. Like when my students have stories to write, I have sort of my own little joke that's in my head, and then I share it with them later. Like somebody's gonna die in almost every story because that's easy, instant drama. It's easy, instant, wheels in motion. And if you want to grab your audience, that's like it's not cheap necessarily, but it's an easy way to do it. And this show uses every trick in the book as far as hooking people's attention. Um,
Every entertainment cliche that you've ever seen.
yeah,
Yes.
they're all on display. It
Every entertainment archetype.
could be. What do they talk about? I have the transcript here between Mr. C and Jeffries. What jumps out there? Why did you send Ray to kill me? Oh, did I? I called Ray. Uh, I don't have your number. I'm not going to talk about Judy. We're not going to talk about Judy at all. That's from the flashback scene. Basically, Jeffries is like, oh, so you are Cooper, because Cooper remembers where that dialogue came from. So maybe Jeffries is just testing him or something. And then he's like, why don't you want to talk about Judy? Why didn't you? Who's Judy? Does she want something from me? So apparently Cooper, if you're saying Bob knows of Judy and wants
Right.
to reconnect with her, Cooper, Mr. C apparently is not aware of this or something.
Well, Judy is the, let's call it, entity that Bob is with when he descends on Earth. That's Judy. And Judy is later the experiment. That's Judy. Judy is mother. My mother is coming. That's Judy. Judy is, and that's why I'm speculating that Judy is, for whatever, in their brains, they've justified that Judy only comes in 25-year intervals, which would account for why it is that it is crucial to get to Bob like now, right? The coordinates that Mr. C is there, really the coordinates he's there for, he's saying it without saying it. He's there for the coordinates to Judy. That's what he's looking for. He's not looking for coordinates to a place. He's looking for coordinates to a thing, a person, if you will, but a thing. He's looking for Judy, right? The coordinates that they're going to give him is to Cooper. Their indication is that those two being at the same place at one time will satisfy the only one can be, right? Which will put Bob back into the waiting room and will stop the plan to get Bob back with Judy. So because something like they've done the damage to this family, right? Now Judy will return for Bob, pick Bob up, and they're out of there, and then they can do it again or something. It's something like this, right? She basically brought him in to do this. Who knows how often they've done this? Who knows how many times? Especially if he's just the evil that men do, right?
How often they've done this in the dreamer's mind or just in the
To
universal
them,
consciousness?
to them, how often they've been responsible for the evil of the world. How many times have they done this, right? And so in this case, what's occurred is it took 25 years to get from this to that, right? But again, of course, what's really happening here is that from the outside perspective, like this is all bullshit that the dreamer's manufacturing, because for 25 years you've let your worst impulses, the shadow, take over your existence, and now you're trying to square it up, and you want to do something different. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of what's occurring. But that's the coordinates. That satisfies the coordinate thing, right? Like they're looking for the coordinates to Judy. How do we know that? Because
If Mr. C ended up on that rock instead of Richard Horn, where would he have gone?
he dies instantaneously, and Bob goes back to the waiting room, which is precisely what they want. They want Bob to go back to the waiting room. So the whole
Who's
purpose,
they?
Mike and the evolution of the arm, and to a higher extent, we know this too. The firemen. How do we know that? Because the coordinates that are supposed to lead Mr. C to Judy, they can be found at the Palmer house. That's when it dawns on him who Judy's host is, right? But they trap him. The fireman moves that scene and puts him in the place where Cooper is going to be, so that the confrontation can occur, right? So you would assume that their plan is to either put Bob back, but what happens is even worse than that. Bob gets snuffed out entirely. The firemen's got an even bigger plan for their ass about this whole thing, right? Now, what's interesting here is on the topic of themes and shows, a lot of what's happening in Twin Peaks: The Return is that it starts to manifest itself into the brand new media, right? So the guy who's going to confront Bob is a superhero. He's a superhero with a superpowered glove because he's a superhero, right? Because media, thus, again, is informing the mind of the person who is the dreamer, right? And then there's all kinds of media stuff that we can talk about at some other point. But that's what Mr. C is. That Mr. C is there essentially for a couple of reasons. This whole thing has been about coordinates. He's under the assumption that Ray and Phillip have attempted to kill him with these falsified coordinates, and so he's there to go, number one, what the hell? And number two, what's the real coordinates? And the coordinates that he gets is going to continue to, it shows you that Jeffries is not on that side and that he's not in the middle. It shows you that this is all part of a grander scheme, right? The
That he's
coordinates he's looking for, we see it. It's at the Palmer house. It's wherever Judy is. That's why he's asking about Judy. And that's the only way that sort of makes sense, what's happening with those coordinates. Why is he interested in Judy? What's the whole thing about that? What have these coordinates been the whole time he's been looking for? And when we finally get to the guy who can give them to you, the first thing he wants to talk about is that. You know what I mean?
Does the coordinates that Jeffries gives to him, are those the coordinates to the rock?
Um, the coordinates he
It's
gets
been a
at that
while.
point.
Man, you got to refresh my memory because that rock
Yes.
scene happens after.
Yes. So what happens is this. So Jeffries, he gets false coordinates and he knows it. But they're the same coordinates. So he's got three sets in the end because he tells this to Richard. He says, I've got two
Yeah,
sets of coordinates that are the same, and I've got one that's different. What would you do? And Richard says, I would follow up on the ones that are the same. Now he knows that because Ray tried to kill him, he knows it's very likely that these coordinates are not, they don't lead to nowhere good, right? Now he's already expressed that there's this place they want him to go back to, and he doesn't want to go to that. What he doesn't really realize is he's unnecessary. Mr. C's unnecessary. He's a carrier, right? He's not necessary to anybody's plan. Nothing good can come from him going to these places. But he doesn't really understand the nature of what's happening with Judy. So as far as he's concerned, Bob wants to go to Judy, and Bob can drive his host in different ways,
so
right?
so
Go ahead.
what does that symbolize in terms of like your larger idea for the show? The fact that Bob's looking to get back with Judy, but Mr. C, carrier of Bob, transporter, is totally in the dark about all this.
Well, if Bob gets back with Judy, it's another 25 years of recklessness and bad behavior. It's just more cycle, right? We're saying 25 years because that's what it was, but it's just a choice to continue to live in the manifestation of all the bad things that happened to you, and now you are the propagator of all of those bad things, and the cycle continues, and you'll inflict it on the next generation and so forth, right? The other coordinates lead to a way out.
Do you think the end of the show where Carrie Page screams is is the real, the real Carrie Page making conscious decisions about the course of her life? Or do you think all this stuff is still happening under the hood?
It's all happening under the hood. But I do think it's different than what people say that it is. So the common interpretation of that scream is that Laura has heard Sarah and now understands that that house is that house. That house is not that house. Nothing that's happening in that scene makes sense from a linear perspective. It just doesn't. You saw who lived at that house. You saw them. They were there, right? So that doesn't make any sense. How can two occupants, is this interdimensional stuff? Is she now hearing something from a different dimension? You know what I mean? None of that stuff could satisfy itself to you. What matters is Carrie Page suddenly comes into contact with a voice from her personal unconscious, and it tells her, oh shit, I am Laura Palmer. Oh, this is this. If I'm Laura and there is a Sarah and this house doesn't have those people, none of this can be real. I'm not Laura. This can't be real. She screams and freaks out. And that is when she wakes up into her real existence. That is when she wakes up into the moment, the thing where she goes, I'm not doing this anymore. She reaches individuation. That's why it's an ending. Because she does reach individuation. She has to
React.
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
Well, I was gonna say she has to go through the confrontation thing. She's not gonna take the easy way out, right? Like it's like they said, it's like Lynch reminded Frost, if they're going to manipulate fate, they're gonna test the gods. That means that this thing cannot go the way that they want it to go. Right? They don't get to just rewrite history and get out of jail free. You've got to actually confront the thing, right? But Carrie
Yeah, but
Page,
you're talking about confronting it like with no conscious awareness at all. So how much of a confrontation is that?
it's because
If
the real confrontation has nothing to do with that. The real confrontation is this doesn't exist. The real confrontation is that this behavior, the way I've been living, these repressions, this thing that's dominated me, this is not the real way to live. This is not it. That's the confrontation. That's what
is,
the real confrontation boils down to.
is your assumption that these characters that live in the personal unconscious who've been running amok each in their various ways and then sort of bring their own demise to themselves as the dreamer kind of wakes up, is your assumption there that like her life is going to improve, like the real person's life will now improve
My assumption
because
is
the
that,
stuff that was, the stuff that correlated with 25 really bad years after probably some worse years before that,
in a
um
really bad
it
moment, the
is
moment of
coming
rock bottom,
is coming to an like is coming to an end, so things are going to get likely to get better. Is that like what you're saying?
you know how it is, right? Like the same is true for a person who crosses the threshold into sobriety. So you're sober and you've reached a better decision for yourself. But there's a lot of work now, and especially work that you're going to look at straight faced, right? You're not going to hide from it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of work that goes into that. That's why programs exist that take you and consolidate you immediately and give you an infrastructure and a place and an ecosystem, and then the guidance about how to handle the reframing now of the person that you're going to be. The same is true, like
Can
in
you just say
every.
one? I don't know exactly what you mean when you say they take you and consolidate you kind of immediately, like with great supports. What do you mean by that?
I mean, like in AA, where you know you've gotten sober day one, and now you're sober, and that's a good thing. And to reach that choice and then do something about it is like a serious choice. It's not like a drunk declaration, like, "Oh man, I gotta stop living like this,
Yeah,
man."
I just wasn't sure about the word consolidate. Like, I don't know what you mean by that, like what that
Well,
word means.
because a lot of the individual aspects that allow for you to make excuses and all that has to fall away. You're gonna
Hmm.
sit. You're gonna listen. It's not your turn to be telling people all about this is what I used to do. And this is what you for a long time. You need to sit and you need to listen. You need to understand that there are people like you that did exactly what you did. You think you're the only one. You ain't. They got all those stories. You know what I mean. You got to sit and listen. And through the sitting and the listening and consolidating yourself into this ecosystem of people that are on these different levels of the journey that you're about to be on, you'll start to understand, like, oh, you can do this, right? You can't, it's not because, you're not there to trade your trauma. So you're gonna hush, right? And then you'll work through the system. So my point is, and even when you do it in a way that contains infrastructure like that, right? It's work.
Yeah,
Even when it's
big
that,
time.
it's work. And the whole purpose of that is to give you like community and somebody to laugh with and somebody to cry with and somebody to like know and somebody that you can look to. And that's the whole purpose of it. So if Carrie Page is she crosses the threshold into this thing that looks more like her consciousness with the place that she actually works and the dead guy that I believe is actually on her couch because I think that's the moment of rock bottom. This abusive relationship that Carrie Page was in, she played out the relationship that she already had with Daddy, right? Like we all do, like whatever our traumas are, we're going to replay those things unless we confront them straight on and go like, yeah, well, I'm not doing that because I can see the mechanics here and I can see this here and I'm going to hold myself accountable to it and whatnot. But you think about something that was inflicted upon her like that, like who is prepared to have the mechanics to deal with that, right? And so there she is, and deciding to do the confrontation, the idea that like that trauma that belongs to them. These 25 years, I've allowed them to have their space rent free in my head, and it's got to
Yeah,
come to a stop.
that's nice. Nicely said. Three speed questions
Oh no. Why are we doing what?
because it's 1:30 in the morning and we're gonna make them speedy. So, question number one: um, what is up with all those mechanical sounds that we hear uh, in Jeffries' room, whatever you want to call it, coming from Jeffries, or in that scene? What is all that?
So I'll try to keep this as short as I can. Jung has this patient, but they're also kind of buddies, right? And the patient and the buddy, like the patient, reaches out to him, and she's like, "I had this crazy dream, and there was this machine in it, and it's making all kinds of noises, and I don't understand what's going on with that, right?" And Jung writes back and goes, "Are you like in a transitional phase? You about to go from one thing to another thing, like you got like a new job and stuff?" She writes, but she's like, I do have a new job, right?" And he goes, "Let me tell you about this dream I had." And Jung starts to talk about he had this dream of a machine that could make golden orbs. It can make orbs. It can make things gold, and it would make an orb, and it would make other things manifest. He has this dream about this machine, and what he decides is that when we dream about machines, it is a fear of crossing into the new world. It's a fear of that, right? So while I do think that consciousness and electricity is very tied in with one another, right? I think if you use the word, synaptic patterns or new pathways, I think Lynch would be like, no, that's not it. If you use the word consciousness and you said, yeah, but this is like the furthering of consciousness, right? The connective consciousness, right? I think it'd have been like, I'm not talking about that. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's very much in that way, but I also think that the machine represents sort of the crossing into the new task, the new thing that's going to have to be put out there.
Question number two. Um, what is up with the black and white scenes in The Return, in your opinion, obviously?
What do you mean by that? Which scenes particularly the
The use of black
film?
and white. So there's like there's the use of black and white that to me seems to just be obvious. Uh, um, it's old timey stuff, so it's black and white, like the 50s and a lot of part eight. Then there's black and white with Cooper and the fireman. Jeffries here seems to be black and white, although maybe it's a very mild sepia. There's some other black and white scenes too, I think. Is
Well,
it
I
just
think
is it just aesthetics or is there something going on?
it is, but I think there is something going on. I think that it's the aesthetics of a specific time period as seen through film. I think that it's an imitation of specific medias of its day. Look at the theater that they're in, the fireman's in, right? Look what's being evoked. Look at the record player, right? So what's being evoked is it's not just the aesthetics of a specific time. It's a film in that time, right? Much like when we cut to and how many pieces of art show up in the 19 in the 50s, not 50s, 50 40s, 50s. How many pieces of art show up in that, right? There's been all of these blogs where they track the amount of times that an actual piece of art Lynch recreates the piece of art, right? And it happens a few times in that scene. You're talking about part 8. And it is for all intents and purposes like a 1950s. Wow. Okay. Not coming back on. Just no. Just no.
No, but I could hear you okay.
I mean, you're just.
Actually, this is pretty cool, man. That looks great.
I don't
I
want to
like
hear.
how that
I don't want to
looks.
hear nothing
Let
from
me
you.
go to my third question.
Oh no no no! What are you doing?
Eh, I mean, I know what you look like. This is cool, man. This is like the Jeffries version of you.
Oh,
I'm
my
not sure you could see how cool
my
this looks.
phone died. My phone died.
Well, let me
Yeah.
let me sneak in my last question while I
And
can.
yet I live.
Exactly. It's very cool. I love this. I think we're gonna go with this from now on.
I'm gonna tell you, half the people just dipped out. They're like, that's it. If I can't see his animated wackiness, I'm done with this.
Why does this is a question from one of our one of our legions of fans who don't exist yet. Um, why does Leland kill Maddy?
Because Maddy is Laura Palmer, obviously. Because the compulsion is to have to get rid of the avatar of that. That's the way she satisfied the narrative of what this is all about. Maddy is a manifestation of all of the good things potentially that person could be if they could be those things. And it's all a justification for why they're going to end up choosing not to be those things. And instead, the shadow is going to run amok, right? It's I think the almost every layer that we see of the dreamer that's through Donna, that's through Audrey, it's through Maddy. They all represent like a different context of what we've been told Laura is pretty specifically, right? And then you've got this false media trope, right? You got the Patty Duke trope of where like two cousins look identically the same, right? Which is just media. Again, it's media in the personal unconscious. But what Maddie represents is the potential to be all of the good things and deny yourself all of those things that would be so easy to blame on what's happened to you, right? And no, we're going to get rid of that. We're getting rid of that. We're killing that off. The potential to be that, we're killing that off. Right. So in some way, it's like, look, we're confronted with it. Maddy is Laura. It's Laura. It's played by Laura. It's Laura. Right? It's just that's not the Laura you're going to be. That's not the Carrie Page that you're going to be. That's not who you're going to pick. You're not all of those things that Laura is. That's not real. And you're not going to be the cookie cutter perfect thing that nothing bad ever happened to you that Maddy represents. You're not going to be that. You ain't picking that. But then in some way, by the end of the show, ironically enough, even though that happened so early, but in some way it's like, yeah, but that's true. You're not going to be some pretend,
Yeah, I do know what you
perfect
mean.
thing. You're not going to be a perfect anything. You're not going to be the perfect whore. You're not going to be the perfect drug addict. You're not going to be the perfect, you're not going to be any of those. Charitable person. You're not going to be any of those things. That's fake. So you're definitely going to be Maddy. You know what I mean?
Um, I have something to show you. So, hey, nice to see you again.
Hey,
Um, it's your lucky day. I'm giving you a little sneak peek of this is what I did today. In addition to getting a little bit ready to talk to you and a whole bunch of family stuff, you wouldn't recognize anything special about this answer key, would you? There are 26 words total.
okay,
Each one starts with a different letter of the alphabet.
I see.
Do you know how hard that was?
It's times like these where you wish to yourself, like you're like, I could have gotten into coin collecting. You know what I'm saying? Like, what's the barrier of entry there on the coin collecting? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I mean,
Or like,
why am I doing this? I
I
don't
could have
know.
collected
It's just
pins. Like shit, I could use it. I don't know.
there's there's only one. I ran into one problem over here at five across and five down because there's 26 total words, and how am I going to get different letters when they both start with the same letter T? So I had to do five down in reverse.
Do you have some like in your imagination? Do you have some utility where this you have devoted so much of like your mental space, your emotional, even your emotional equity. I have seen you get pumped about this. You're like, you'll never believe what I did today. And what? And you're like, it's this crossword, right? And I'm like, you wait, you just okay. But do you? Let me give you an example. So I will go into these fits where I will read a biography and then I will have to read everything that ever. So I did this one. So one time I did this. One time I did this with the New York promotion that becomes WWF, that becomes WWF, that becomes WWE, and as you do, I decided that I needed to be a wrestling historian because why would you not? I did the same thing with Doc Holliday once, right? And then to a larger degree, like all of the people that were involved with that, and then the people who were like peripherally involved with that, to the point where like I'm answering trivia questions about Bat Masterson for no reason,
Yeah,
right? Now, in my head, this is valuable information. This is information that will definitely come back around. And the fact that I have stored so much of this information, um, as opposed to, let's say, working on anything about production that could have actually gone to my
yeah,
real business,
sure,
right?
yeah,
It's all important and it's all valuable somehow. But that's not true. No one's ever going to consult me and go, hey, man, so it's come to our attention that you spent years studying the framework of territorial wrestling. So we're going to ask you, buddy, what should we do with this independent promotion? No one's asking me that ever.
nope, no,
No.
it's not about that. Um, Bob wants in, I think. I think Bob wants to get in to all, to everybody. And So for me, it's just I'm gonna choose where my attention goes, as opposed to potentially having my attention hijacked by something.
Are
Or
you a candidate for that? Do you feel like you're a candidate for your attention could go to darker forces than that? What are we saying here?
no, but no. When I say Bob, I don't even mean something like evil like that. I just mean garbage, BS, nonsense that all of a sudden occupies you, and and then all this time has slipped by, and it's like, where was I? What was I doing? Like, where was my attention? Um, I don't have any productive ideas for where where to really put my attention, but I'm gonna like damn well choose myself where it goes. And we live in an age where it's hijack time, I think. Um, so it's not, I don't have any sort of sessions that I go to. I don't I like church stuff and all that, but I don't go. I'm all for it, but it's not what I do. Um, I don't know. So so I don't have like that structure to structure my habits or my morals or things like that. I just decide for myself, I think. And I don't know. I liked putting my attention into Twin Peaks for a while because it stimulated me. I
Right.
like putting my attention here now. It stimulate. I mean, 90% of my attention is going into my own household. You know what I'm saying? That's just the nature of the life that I live, and I know you can relate.
Well,
That's
Twin
like,
Peaks, it's like whatever capacity that you have, whatever registry of materials that you have is what you are going to like litter that material full of. So if you have like a fairly deep capacity and you've spent the vast majority of your time filling said capacity with like information that you can utilize, your experience to Twin Peaks is going to be this very vast landscape of concepts. And that's surrealism in general, though, is it not? Like that's surrealism in general will allow you to play that game to a very whatever your depth is the depth that you will be playing that game at, right? And that's what makes it so intriguing. That's why that thing is so intriguing. I've
yeah,
got
look,
this.
you said you spent, forget the WWF and Doc Holliday and all that. You said you've been at the Twin Peaks thing for 10 years, like not in a casual way.
No, I tried on every single person's theory. I tried to
Yeah,
I tried.
it's
Yeah,
weird. I mean, we like it, It's as simple as that. It,
yeah,
it's
it's a
weird to devote this level of time to something. In a way it's weird, but in a way it's not. It's what you like. What's wrong with doing
yeah,
something you like,
and it's effective in a way that I recognize that people in the world right now are are doing the same thing with Severance, right? And that's cool. I've got my ideas on Severance, but the ideas of Severance go like, well, this is how I think it's going to end, right? And that's about where you go. It's like, can you pick up on all the visual cues and all of the clues that are going on? Yeah, yes, we see that, yes. But it's there's something that is different about the purposefully uncanny and the questionably uncanny. Twin Peaks walks a thinner line on making you guess whether or not something is purposeful or a feeling is purposeful than anything ever has. If a show drags out a mannequin that starts talking, you understand you're supposed to be in the midst of an uncanny moment, right? If a show has an owl go above your head, but doesn't make any reference to the fascination with the line, the owls aren't what they seem, you sit and question the nature of why that's happening. And is it calling back the other show? And does this show know that show was a show? And it's all of these things, right? It's a way thin line. It's a way thin line. Um, and that's part of it. So part of it is what is your what are the what is the vastness of the mental gym that occupies your brain? That is going to be how you play the game of Twin Peaks. But yeah, no, I allocated a serious amount of time to it in a fun way that that in all honesty, I wasn't on a quest to go someday I will come up with my own idea. I wanted somebody to say I needed people to say the things they were saying and go, did you notice this? Did you see this? Did you know that this is also in this film? And go like, wow, like that's the information I was looking for. Had somebody had said something that definitively cracked open the thing for me, that would have been it, right? I just, at the point where I started to read Jung to see whether or not can I find any of this, right? Let's start with the shadow. What's he on about? Is he going to say anything that's going to seem to line up with like the motivations of what would be the shadow in Twin Peaks? Oh, all of it? Huh. Okay. Well, that's different, right?
Yeah.
And thus that thing began.
What what should we do next? Whenever that ends up happening. Any ideas?
Well, at some point we're going to have to let the audience catch up and start playing the game with us. And what we want to do is we want to take we want to take weekly theme song submissions and just listen to the theme songs right here on the show, right? And then I'll promise to not be as mean as I would like to be about it.
And I won't be as mean to you as I would never be anyway.
No, no. This show has been brought to you by a guy who has no problem whatsoever in dismissing all the passivity, all the passiveness that I could possibly contain, and another guy who's just holding on to dear life, going like, "It's cool. I don't have to scream at everybody." But see, here's the difference between you and me. The grand difference between the two of us is that you are going to be Michael Douglas and falling down one day, right? It's unlikely to be me, right?
Mm-mm.
I've never met something I didn't like that I wasn't willing to tell you all about.
Did you know that the teachers in my school, I guess, were kind of forced to write nice things about the other teachers? I think I was absent that day, but then they were printed out on like this little scroll and then given to us during teacher appreciation week. So I was given this scroll full of like, nice things. 70% of them said he's calm. That was like the nicest things that people could say about me. He's like, you know, he's like the eye of the hurricane all the time, or maybe sometimes predictably unpredictable in a creative way. But
Yeah, but see,
ever described as calm, I'm not going falling down. That's not in me.
I don't know, man. I'm reading between the lines on what they're saying. What they're really saying is we're watching this guy. What they're like, we just want you to know you're really sweet. No, really, I mean it. Really.
Well, ask my friends about what Wendy's means. That's for another day.
Yeah, did you have a blow your
Wendy's.
top moment? Did it happen? Did you do it?
No, no, no. But that was the implication, he's the guy who could go into Wendy's one day and go all frosty in there. But nah, I'm freaking even keel, man.
Well, I mean, look, some people have to be. Some
Now,
people,
unless there's some sort of shadow that I do have access to, by the way, I'm not afraid to take a little bit of the blade out just to let you know that I have it at any point. But
well, your children will do that for you because you start to realize that you're doing a grand disservice to them if you're going to be the buddy all the time. You can't be the
mhm.
buddy all the time. That's a disservice, right? So, despite how you may want to, right? Or just, despite how soft on every single issue that you want to be allowed to play it, you can't, because that's not a real groundwork for how life is going to work for them,
Yeah,
right?
100%. Yeah, same thing in the classroom. But so I guess we have no plan for next time. We'll come up with something.
Oh, there's plenty of show.
Think so. So it's about 2 o'clock. We started at 11 p.m. It's 2 a.m. And anything you want to say for closing thoughts?
I do. This show has been brought to you by the letter P, and also by contributions made by viewers like you.
I'll see you in cryptic crossword land. And what I'm going to do is close out this episode with a couple clues.
I'll see you in my dreams.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Hey, that would be weird. That would be weird. Let's hope that that doesn't happen. You know, I like you and all, quite a bit. Love spending time with you. I enjoy talking to you. I even enjoy listening to your podcast solo with your lovely wife, Heather, with Gordon, the Chat GPT co-host.
With Gordon the Chat GPT that
I
I
like
was.
all forms. I don't need to see you in my dreams, though.
It will happen. It will happen. And it'll be innocuous. It won't even, there will be no relevance. There'll be nothing happening.
I would assume you would show up as like a tree or something like that. Like you would show up in some sort of hybrid form.
But not for any like purpose or central utility, like none of that. It'll just be some observation. I'll be like, hey, you know what the tree next to me means, right? Listen, according to Carl Jung, you'd be like, I got to get out of here. That's it.
If you see any sort of mist in your dream, that would be me. I have been described as having that property, kind of like a mist, or you're not quite sure exactly what's happening, but all of a sudden something has sort of taken over a little bit.
I've been described as a sledgehammer with a megaphone attached to it.
Yeah.
So that's how this show works, right? Listen, here's what people don't know. Here's what people don't know. This show, this is all happening in their personal unconscious. I am the shadow you. That's what's happening. That's what this show really is.
Yeah, and I always go back to the same question, which is who's who's dreaming this thing, you know?
Well, in this case, it's you. It's you. You know what I mean? No, nobody could be this vitriolic all the time.
Vitriolic. Are you being sarcastic or are you being serious?
I'm talking about me, guy.
Okay. Ah, you describe yourself as vitriolic?
Only for the purposes of entertainment and demonstration. It's funny about
I
being
don't see
a.
that.
It's funny about being a
How do you think people take you? Like forget in general within this little world that we occupy together. It's
I
kind of
think.
podcasty, Twin Peaksy type thing. How do you think you're? I don't know. Do you occupy a certain role or space, or are you perceived in a certain way, or do you have like really no
Well, first
idea?
of all, no, it would be entirely facetious to pretend like the podcast that I did for a very minimal amount of time um, had enough of an audience to create like a wide perception. That would be, but of the people that I did talk to through you, I spoke to, most of the people whose work I went through to get to my concepts. Meaning that for the band of people that consider themselves the Twin Peaks community, the people who like to see analysis, either read it, watch it, whatever the case, listen to it, whatever the case might
Mhm.
be, those folks would be intimately familiar with all the people that I basically came into contact because of you. And the way that I would assume that those people perceive me is that I am much more forceful than your garden variety Twin Peaks fan commentator, right? That is sort of an affect of years worth of being the band leader and the MC of these things. No
Hmm.
one tells you when you're in like when you start your career, no one says, "Hey, listen, there's going to be this huge majority of the time where you're expected to deliver improv, not musically, on a microphone. And for every dead space that occurs, it instantaneously degrades your credibility to the audience. So you're going to be responsible for making noise all the way through. And that noise will be comprised of whatever. So you better just be good at it. Because if you don't have something to say and people aren't willing to listen to it, that's it, and they're gone, and you won't be coming back, and that will affect everybody's money, and you will no longer have a band because you're not responsible, right?
Interesting.
So it's this, and it's a lot of time.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time, right? And things will happen that no one even considers. The guitar player breaks his string on this song. Now he's going to have to restring things, and while he's doing that, I'm going to sit and just talk, right? And so what started to happen was I realized that I got over like the radio DJ guy within a few years because everybody's natural inclination is to go radio DJ guy. We're like,
Okay.
hey, right now we're gonna do another song. The next song that's coming up in this set's gonna be from 1973. Billy Joel put it on a record. It was called Piano Man from the record, Piano Man. Right? Like that's your first natural inclination. Then you get over that and you realize like people really respond to the humor of you if you point out the absurdity of the situation that you're in. So that started to become a thing with me where I would just sort of point out the absurdity of a situation. And I would say, I'd say things like, the next song that we're going to play that you're going to instantly clap when you recognize and then care less 15 seconds later is going to be this song. And people would be like, what? Did he say the thing? He said the
Yeah.
thing. He said the real thing. Right. So, yeah, a lot of that. But I would assume that because of that trained behavior, the way that I operate on the microphone, which is like, let's kill the dead air, right? It does come across as very commanding as opposed to a lot of what you would listen to in the Twin Peaks. And by the way, when I was listening to folks who were giving their thoughts on Twin Peaks, it never crossed my mind, not even one time. What is their microphone technique? What is their in the same way that I would analyze watching somebody on stage. Now that there's no shutting that off, right? I'm not watching a band perform the way that most people are. It's just you just can't, right? But when it came to like the analysis of Twin Peaks, it always boiled down to the same thing. It was like, did you do your homework? Do you have like a pretty good understanding of the way that things went and how, and then ultimately, what new thing are you bringing? That was it. And that's why you and me are friends. We're friends because you were asking better questions than everybody else. So I couldn't wait. Like if I liked this guy's book or I liked this guy's blog or whatever the case was, right? I couldn't wait for them to show up over here because what was going to happen is they wouldn't necessarily be challenged in a confrontational way, right? But you'd want them to extend the logic all the way out to an endpoint to see how far it would go, right? And obviously, when you're writing for yourself, when if I'm making a 12-minute video on something that I really want to make this profound point, I can leave out all the shit I don't know. I can leave out all the shit that makes me look like I have no understanding of it, right? So when somebody else is pressing you to go, well, how does that work with this? Well, how does that work with this? Right? And you just had a better you had a better venue for that, right? And that's why we're buddies. You will take space and I will go like this, right? Because that's who I'm created to be. Now, the other side of your question, and this is probably what you really wanted. The other side of your question is people really, really dislike it when you come from a Frost perspective. They won't say that, right? They won't say it. It's sort of in the way that they tag things. Like, oh yeah, no, 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 yeah, no, Frost is great. Frost is great. But you know what I mean? And it's so people they feel like I'm taking that away. There's also sort of look, there's a credibility buy-in. If you feel like the Jung thing is way too vast and so it's applicable to all things, then you're not really dealing with what my theory is saying, right? Because again, it's not something. It's like if I accuse a character of being an archetype, we've actually got to follow through with that and see whether or not that works. If it doesn't, we got to go, okay, that didn't work, and pull it back down. I can't just say, well, metaphorically, it's the archetype of this, and sometimes it's the archetype of that. Although Jung had no problem with it. What do you think, Anthony, that the requisite Twin Peaks intelligentsia feels about me? And I'll beat up anybody who. Never mind. Never mind. That's not it.
I think when you were doing a couple little things with me in a group setting, you brought a tremendous amount of energy and like new angles. And I think there was a lot of sort of processing of what you were saying on the spot. And I don't know. And I was kind of hoping there might be more follow up. I guess that's why I'm here doing this, partly because I just thought you had so much stuff to bring to the table that I hadn't really been hearing elsewhere. That
Yeah,
was to me original, but I don't care about that. Interesting is what I cared about.
sure.
And yeah, I just remember a lot of people having thinking, sort of reacting, nodding, processing, um, saying like, wow, there's really something to think about. But it didn't really go anywhere.
Well, again, I said this to you privately, and I will say this: if you use this on the show, you're more than welcome to. Um, yeah, if you have a book and you've already written the book, and the book comes from the perspective of what you believe Twin Peaks is about, and somebody who is saying things that's never really been, I mean, a lot of what I've said has been said in splintered ways by other people, which I didn't really realize until after the fact, right? But a lot of people, I mean, look, if you've ever heard Mark Frost talk about Jung, then you'll probably say something about Jung. That's not new information, right? Suggesting it's happening in the way that I'm saying, precisely in the way I'm saying. I don't know if anybody's ever come up with that before. I guess we'd have to read everything everybody's ever said. But the main proponents of like Twin Peaks analysis, they've got books, they've got blogs, they've got websites, they've got things. And so to a degree, they're going to have to defend the stance that they've come up with because they have got money dumped into an angle, and the hope is somebody likes it enough to buy it, right? If it feels to the audience who is going to buy these things, they don't even really buy the shit that they're saying. That they'll go, oh yeah, your thing. No, maybe that's it. I don't know. I don't want to participate in purchasing your materials if that's where you stand. Why then why? How much homework could you have done if you don't really stand by the stuff you want me to purchase from you? Right? They have every right to stand by. And let's face it, you were talking to a lot of people that are very high up the ladder of the Twin Peaks analysis community, and in some cases, just high up the ladder in writing in general. And so those people are going to be impacted by who purchases things from them. They don't have any right to be nice to every Johnny come lately with a brand new pitch and a brand new way to look at it. Now, I'm not saying anybody was mean, right? But if I had a book out and now I'm on a panel and there's four contrasting ideas about what this show means, I'm not compelled to drop my theory and go, oh, you know what? No, it's him. No, it's him. It's his thing. Forget it. It's his thing, right? And so there is a balancing act to that. These things cost money, man. These things cost money and they cost time. So I think that has a lot to do with it, you know. And we were sort of in a spin cycle of everybody sort of repeating things for quite some time, right? Specifically with the videos, there was becoming like this tier, this pyramidal like tier of here are the things we all agree to. You know what I'm saying? It was kind of that thing where it was like, and it was getting very, very in step And I didn't agree with a lot of those things. I just thought, look, if you really push these things to their outer limits, they don't hold, right? There has to be a theory where everything can stuff inside of it, right? If we operate from this is all a dream, then you have to go, why? I mean, just that question alone, why? Why is it a dream? What does that do? Boy, it's a very comprehensive dream. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I've never had dreams this comprehensive. Whoa. Right? So I didn't feel like things were being said in that way. However, on the flip side of that, I didn't never had a theory of anything had I not gone through all of that stuff. Because a lot of the work is contingent on other people's having interviewed such and such, having put themselves in the room and flown themselves down someplace. You know what I mean? Um, so a lot of it owes itself to that. So yeah, that's your takeaway. I think your takeaway is the same as mine. They're like, wow, this guy's loud.
Well, at least I learned why you have an answer to every question. Not the answer, but an answer. You can't have dead air, and and I create a lot of dead air when I talk because I pause a lot. I think a lot. I stutter a little bit. So I think it's just as simple as that. There's a compulsion to fill the air with something. But I have to say, the way you fill the air is a delight as far as I'm
Okay,
concerned.
I'll give you one right now. And I know you love to say that. Now maybe this makes our show less interesting if I actually say this, but I'll give you I'll give you one right now that is this gigantic, and I'm gonna have to do a lot. I've investigated all of these other things that are very important to investigate because now in the show they're all more pivotal, right? Well, look, we'll all agree that things that we thought were super pivotal in the first two seasons turns out they're not important whatsoever. At least they weren't to the trajectory of what's happening, right? So there's sort of a dead end, and so it's hard for you to understand what's going on. I have no idea the meaning behind why do we need to investigate Cooper's former love life, and I guess that Wyndham Earl helps usher in the concepts of things that will then later on be important. I guess not the least of which is looks to me like Mr. C's running around with his computer, so that's convenient. But what is why would the dreamer I understand the utility of Cooper is investigating, but why does the dreamer necessarily need a backstory to that? And what connective tissue does that have with the dreamer's own existence? And what can you possibly gain from that story being attached to Cooper? What does that possibly do to help this person become their best self? And so I haven't had time to even think about that. I haven't had time to because it serves no purpose by the time Diane shows up, and it's like, guess we don't care how Annie is. I guess we sure as hell don't care about the things that happened previous to that, right? And so, you know, there are things in the show, especially in the first two seasons. I got my head more wrapped around what's happening in the return, which is strange because it is so esoteric. But it's the end point, right? So all these things are gonna lead to that. So naturally, here it's going to be more solid than as we start to dissipate all the little tenets that created this moving arm. Like some of those things, they just lead to nowhere. So maybe I'll have dead air then. You'll go, let's talk about Pete Martell, and I'll just go, oh God, okay, all right.
I think I'm going to pick the next direction, but we'll see. I think it's possible that we might do a response to anybody that has decided to weigh in after hearing the first couple episodes. We might just take a couple questions or something and respond to that. And if not, I'm gonna shoot you something in the next day or two, a couple ideas. Am I sleeping already? I don't even know. It's 2:12 a.m.
You are, and this is what you said was not going to happen. You are literally dreaming
Holy
about me.
shit. I'm now in my own dream
You
with
are.
you.
You are. Well, see, if you think about what's happening right now, This is what I'm saying about Mulholland Drive. There you go. There you go.
Nice to see you, man.
All right, brother.
Say hi to the family, please. And enjoy the weekend. What are we doing? I didn't stop yet.
Oh, hit stop.
Nah.
Unless you just want to let all that dead air be there.
Yeah, let's try that.
And then you'll be like,
Let's try that out.
You just put the graphic dead air. So look, I think a lot of that, I don't know, if you edit together something that's like passable.
You're getting very, very relaxed, is all I'm saying. Very relaxed.
I don't know, man. I don't know if like all that personal shit needs to play or whatnot. And not even that I care. I don't.
Would you like me to stop it or no?